Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The call came through to FBI Special Agent Raymond Garrett at 5:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in August 1989. He was already awake in his Dallas apartment, reviewing case files from a string of bank robberies that had plagued North Texas for 3 months. The phone's harsh ring cut through the pre-dawn quiet with an urgency that made him answer on the second ring. "Agent Garrett," he said, setting down his coffee. "Raymond, this is Director Thompson. We need you in Smith County immediately. We have a situation that requires someone with your particular expertise in organized disappearances." Raymond had worked several mass disappearance cases in his 22 years with the Bureau: cult movements, witness protection extractions gone wrong, human trafficking operations. But something in Thompson's voice suggested this was different. "What's the situation, sir?" 7 ranch families have vanished from their properties over the past 2 weeks. That's approximately 35 people, including children. No signs of struggle, no notes, no financial irregularities that would suggest planned flight. Local law enforcement is overwhelmed. 35 people don't just vanish, Raymond said, already reaching for his jacket. "That's what we thought. But Raymond, there's something else. Each family disappeared during the same 3-hour window, between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. And at each scene, investigators found evidence of careful planning. This isn't random." The drive from Dallas to Smith County took Raymond through the heart of Texas ranch country. The landscape gradually shifted from urban sprawl to endless fields of wheat and corn, punctuated by the occasional farmhouse or grain silo. As he drove, he considered the possibilities. Mass kidnapping required resources and planning that few criminal organizations possessed. Voluntary disappearance of 7 families suggested cult involvement or coordinated flight from some threat. Smith County sat in the Texas Panhandle, just southwest of Amarillo. The county seat, Hereford, had a population of about 15,000, mostly farmers and ranchers who'd worked the same land for generations. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where strangers were noticed immediately. The FBI had established a command center at the Smith County Sheriff's Office, a modest brick building now bustling with activity. Raymond counted vehicles from multiple agencies: state police, Texas Rangers, even a van from the DEA. Sheriff Bill Morrison met him at the entrance. The man was in his 60s with deep worry lines that suggested he hadn't slept in days. "Agent Garrett, thank you for coming. I've been sheriff here for 18 years. And nothing like this has ever happened. These aren't drifters or people with reasons to run. These are established families with roots going back generations." Morrison led him to a conference room that had been converted into a situation room. Maps covered the walls, marked with red pins indicating the locations of the missing families. Photos of the victims were arranged on boards: smiling faces at church picnics, high school graduations, family reunions. "Tell me about the first disappearance," Raymond said, studying the pattern of pins. Morrison pulled out a file. "The Hendersons. September 4th. Jim and Martha Henderson, their 3 kids, and Martha's elderly mother. Their ranch hand, Miguel Santos, came to work that morning and found the place deserted. Breakfast was on the table, half eaten. Coffee was still warm in the pot. Jim's truck was in the driveway, keys in the ignition. Any signs of forced entry? None. Doors were unlocked, which isn't unusual out here. No broken windows, no blood, no signs of struggle. Even their dogs were still there, calm as could be. That detail made Raymond pause. The dogs didn't bark? Weren't agitated? That's what's strange. These were working dogs, protective of the family. Miguel said they were just sitting on the porch like they were waiting for the family to come back. Raymond examined the photographs from the Henderson scene. Everything suggested the family had simply walked away from their breakfast. But 7 families doing the same thing over 2 weeks suggested coordination. Tell me about the other families. Morrison walked him through each case. The Walkers vanished September 8th, the Brennans September 12th. The patterns were identical. Morning routines interrupted. No preparation for departure, no missing vehicles. Have you found any connections between the families? Raymond asked. They all knew each other, of course. Small community, but they weren't particularly close. Different churches, kids in different schools. The only thing they had in common was that they were all longtime residents, all successful ranchers. Clarence Webb, an agent from the San Antonio office, entered the room. Raymond, glad you're here. We've been analyzing financial records. No large withdrawals, no suspicious deposits. If these families were planning to disappear, they didn't take their money with them. What about threats? Anyone with grudges against multiple families? We've checked, Morrison said. No lawsuits, no major disputes. These were well-liked people. Vernon Hayes, a local deputy, knocked and entered. Sheriff, Agent Garrett, we just found something at the Brennan Ranch you need to see. They drove 15 miles outside Hereford to the Brennan property, a modest but well-maintained ranch house surrounded by wheat fields. Vernon led them to a barn behind the house. We did a more thorough search this morning, Vernon explained. Found this hidden under hay bales. It was a trap door, professionally constructed and well hidden. Below was a room about 10 feet square, concrete walls containing supplies, water, canned food, medical supplies, even gas masks. A bunker, Raymond observed. Recent construction. Within the last year, based on the concrete, Vernon confirmed. But here's the interesting part. We found similar hidden rooms at 3 other missing families' properties. Raymond examined the supplies. Everything was organized, labeled, dated. This wasn't panic preparation. This was methodical planning for some anticipated event. They were preparing for something, Clarence said. But what? Back at the command center, Lloyd Patterson, the county medical examiner, presented his findings from examining the scenes. No blood, no tissue, no signs of violence. But I found something odd at each scene. Trace amounts of diesel exhaust in enclosed spaces where there shouldn't be any. Someone had vehicles running inside garages or near windows. Transportation, Raymond concluded. Multiple vehicles to move 35 people. Eugene Martinez from the State Police Cybercrimes Unit had been analyzing phone records. All 7 families received calls from the same number in the week before they disappeared. The number traces to a burner phone, but the calls originated from towers near Amarillo. How long were the calls? Between 2 and 5 minutes, just long enough for detailed instructions. Howard Brooks, a behavioral analyst from Quantico, had been studying the victim profiles. These families fit a specific pattern. All had teenage or young adult children. All owned their land outright. All had minimal debt. They were specifically selected. Selected for what? Morrison asked. That's what we need to determine, Raymond said. He turned to the map, studying the geography. The properties form a rough circle, about 30 miles in diameter. What's at the center? Vernon checked the map. Nothing. Empty federal land, been unused since the 1940s. Unused for what? Morrison's expression darkened. There was a military installation there during World War II, chemical weapons testing facility, officially decommissioned in 1946. Raymond felt pieces clicking together. 7 families with bunkers preparing for something, calls from the same number, disappeared without struggle. They weren't taken, they went willingly. But where? And why? Clarence asked. Before anyone could answer, the phone rang. Morrison answered, his face paling as he listened. "There's been a development," he said, hanging up. "A teenager just walked into the hospital in Amarillo. Says his name is Timothy Hutchinson. He's the eldest son of James and Patricia Hutchinson, the 4th family that disappeared." Within an hour, Raymond and his team were at the Northwest Texas Hospital in Amarillo. Timothy Hutchinson, 17 years old, sat in a hospital bed, physically unharmed but clearly traumatized. His clothes were clean but showed signs of living rough. Dirt under his fingernails, scratches on his arms from brush, sunburn on his face. "Timothy," Raymond said gently, showing his badge. "I'm Agent Garrett with the FBI. Can you tell us what happened to your family?" The boy's eyes darted nervously. They said not to tell. Said it would put everyone in danger. Who said that? Mr. Coleman, Samuel Coleman. He's the one who called all the families. Raymond recognized the name. Coleman was a former Army chemical weapons specialist who'd worked at the decommissioned facility. He'd disappeared from official records in 1975. "What did Coleman tell your families?" Timothy's voice dropped to a whisper. "He said there was going to be an accident. A chemical release from the old facility. Said the government knew but wasn't going to evacuate people in time. He offered to help us get to safety." "Where did he take you?" "Underground. There's a whole complex beneath the old base. Tunnels, rooms, supplies for hundreds of people. He said we'd have to stay there for months, maybe years, until the contamination cleared." "Why did you leave?" Timothy's hands clenched the bed sheets. "Because I saw the truth. There was no chemical leak. Coleman's been planning this for years, collecting families he thought were pure American stock. He's building some kind of underground community, says the government is going to collapse and only the prepared will survive." "A survivalist cult," Clarence said quietly. "But it's more than that," Timothy continued. "He has military equipment down there, weapons from the old base that were never decommissioned. Chemical weapons, Agent Garrett. He keeps them as insurance. Says if the government tries to stop him, he'll release them." Raymond's blood ran cold. A militarized survivalist group with access to World War II-era chemical weapons, holding 30-plus civilians underground. This had just become a national security issue. "Timothy, I need you to tell me everything about the complex, entrances, exits, how many people Coleman has with him." Over the next 2 hours, Timothy provided detailed intelligence. The complex was accessed through 3 hidden entrances on the old military land. Coleman had approximately 15 followers who'd been helping him prepare for years. The missing families were being held in a section of the complex, told that leaving would mean certain death from chemical exposure. "He shows them news footage," Timothy explained. "Edited videos that make it look like there's been disasters above ground. Most of the families believe they're lucky to be alive." "How did you realize the truth?" "I found a way to the surface through a ventilation shaft. Saw that everything was normal. When I confronted Coleman, he locked me in a storage room. I escaped through the same shaft and ran." Raymond assembled his team. This required careful planning. They couldn't assault the complex without risking Coleman releasing chemical weapons. They needed a way to extract the families without triggering a violent response. "We need someone on the inside," Raymond said. "Someone Coleman would trust." Lloyd had been researching Coleman's background. He has a daughter, Sarah. Estranged for 20 years, she lives in Oklahoma City. Would he trust her? According to records, he's been sending her letters for years, trying to reconcile. She never responds, but he keeps trying. It was a long shot, but it might be their only option. Raymond made the call to bring Sarah Coleman into the operation. Meanwhile, Eugene had discovered something crucial in Coleman's military records. The chemical weapons at that base were neutralized in 1968. A classified operation replaced all active agents with harmless substitutes. After an accidental release nearly occurred, Coleman might not know his arsenal is worthless. This changed everything. The hostages weren't in danger from chemical weapons, but Coleman and his followers were still armed and dangerous. They needed to extract the families before Coleman discovered his leverage was gone. Vernon had been mapping the old facility based on archived blueprints. There's a service tunnel that connects to the Amarillo water system. It was sealed in the 1970s, but if we could breach it, we'd have a way in that Coleman might not be monitoring. Raymond studied the maps. They had the beginning of a plan. Sarah Coleman to create a distraction. Entry through the water tunnel. Extraction of hostages before Coleman could react. But with 35 civilians, including children and elderly, in a confined space with armed captors, the margin for error was virtually zero. "We go in tomorrow night," Raymond decided. "Vernon, I want that tunnel breach ready. Clarence, coordinate with tactical teams. Eugene, keep monitoring communications in case Coleman tries to reach out to other survivalist groups. Lloyd, work with the hospital to have medical teams standing by." As the team dispersed to prepare, Howard approached Raymond privately. "You know, there's something else to consider. Even if we get everyone out safely, Coleman chose these families for a reason. They trusted him enough to disappear from their lives. That kind of influence doesn't just vanish." Raymond nodded. The physical rescue would be just the beginning. Deprogramming 35 people who'd been convinced the world above had ended would take months, maybe years. Some might never fully recover from the psychological manipulation. But first, they had to get them out alive. That night, Raymond stood at the edge of the abandoned military base, looking out over the empty land that hid Coleman's underground kingdom. Somewhere beneath his feet, 7 families huddled in artificial light, believing they were the lucky survivors of an apocalypse that existed only in one man's twisted vision. Tomorrow, they would attempt to bring them back to reality. But Raymond knew from experience that sometimes the hardest prison to escape was the one built from fear and carefully crafted lies. Sarah Coleman sat in the FBI safe house in Oklahoma City, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. At 43, she bore little resemblance to her father. Where he was tall and imposing, she was slight and quiet. She hadn't seen Samuel Coleman in 20 years, not since the day she'd walked out of his compound in Montana, vowing never to return. "Miss Coleman," Raymond said gently, "I know this is difficult, but we need your help. Your father has 35 people underground, including children. He trusts you, or at least wants to." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "Trust? My father doesn't trust anyone. He sees enemies everywhere, conspiracies in every shadow. That's why my mother left him, why I left him." "But he's been writing to you," Clarence pointed out, showing her copies of the letters they'd intercepted. "Every month for 20 years. Sarah glanced at the letters, her expression softening slightly. He always talked about redemption, about making things right. But his version of right was everyone living by his rules, preparing for his apocalypse. "We're not asking you to reconcile," Raymond assured her. "We just need you to distract him long enough for us to get the families out. One phone call saying you want to talk. Keep him occupied while we breach the complex." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Those families don't deserve this. Children don't deserve to grow up in darkness because of one man's paranoia." While Sarah prepared for her role, the tactical teams assembled at a staging from the abandoned base. Vernon had spent the day with a specialized breach team, quietly opening the sealed water tunnel. The passage was narrow, partially flooded, but passable. Eugene had been monitoring radio frequencies and discovered Coleman's people were using an encrypted channel. "They do regular check-ins every 2 hours. Next one is at midnight. If we time this right, we'll have a 2-hour window before they realize something's wrong." Howard had interviewed Timothy Hutchinson extensively, building a psychological profile of Coleman and his followers. Coleman genuinely believes he's saving these people. In his mind, he's a hero. That delusion is both his strength and weakness. If we can make him doubt his mission, even for a moment, his followers might hesitate. Lloyd had analyzed the chemical weapons Coleman claimed to possess. Based on Timothy's descriptions and the facility's inventory records, Coleman has M47 chemical bombs from 1943. Even if they were still active, which they're not, the delivery system is corroded beyond use. The threat is psychological, not practical. At 11:45 p.m., the operation began. Sarah Coleman made the call from a secure line that would appear to come from her Oklahoma City home. Raymond and Clarence listened on another line as the phone rang. "Hello?" Samuel Coleman's voice was gruff, suspicious. "Dad? It's Sarah." The silence stretched for several seconds. "Sarah? Is it really you?" "It's me, Dad. I've been thinking about your letters, about what you said about the world getting worse." "You have?" The eagerness in his voice was painful to hear. "Sarah, I knew you'd understand eventually. The signs are everywhere. Government overreach, social decay, economic collapse imminent." As Sarah kept her father talking, drawing him into a lengthy discussion about his theories, the breach team entered the water tunnel. Led by Albert Reeds, the tactical team leader, 12 agents moved through knee-deep water, their night vision equipment turning the darkness into grainy green visibility. The tunnel opened into a maintenance room in the lower level of the complex. According to Timothy's intelligence, the families were being held 2 levels up, in what used to be the base's barracks. Coleman's people were concentrated in the command center 1 level above that. "No resistance so far," Albert reported via radio, moving to the barracks level. The team climbed rusted metal stairs, every footstep carefully placed to avoid noise. They reached a heavy door marked with Coleman's crude security, a simple padlock that Albert cut through with bolt cutters. Beyond the door was a corridor lit by battery-powered LEDs. The walls were lined with motivational posters about survival and self-sufficiency, children's drawings of life underground, and schedules for daily activities. It was a twisted facsimile of normal life. The first room they checked contained the Henderson family. Jim Henderson jumped up when the door opened, positioning himself protectively in front of his wife and children. "FBI," Albert whispered, showing his badge. "We're here to get you out." "But the contamination," Martha Henderson began. "There is no contamination," Albert said firmly. "You've been lied to. The world above is fine. Your nephew Timothy sent us." The Hendersons' teenage daughter, Rebecca, spoke up. "I knew it. I told you something was wrong." "The videos, mister." Coleman showed us they were all old footage. One by one, the team located and freed the families. Most came willingly once they learned the truth. though some required more convincing. The elderly, particularly, struggled to accept they'd been deceived. Meanwhile, Sarah kept her father engaged. "Dad, tell me about your community. How many people have you saved?" 43 souls, Coleman replied proudly. 7 good families who understood the danger. My core team who've been preparing for years. We have enough supplies for 5 years, weapons to defend ourselves. Everything we need to rebuild when the surface is safe. "Weapons," Sarah prompted, knowing the FBI was listening. The government left so much behind when they abandoned this place. They thought they'd neutralized everything, but I found caches they missed. Chemical weapons, Sarah. Insurance against anyone who tries to stop our mission. On the ground, Raymond winced. Coleman still believed his arsenal was real. That delusion might make him desperate when he discovered the rescue. Albert's voice came through the radio. "We have all 7 families." Moving to extraction point. But as they moved toward the tunnel, an alarm began blaring through the complex. Someone had noticed the broken padlock or the missing families. "Breach! Breach!" Voices shouted over Coleman's radio frequency. On the phone, Coleman's voice turned cold. "Sarah, did you call me to distract me?" "Dad, I don't know what you're talking about." "You're with them, aren't you?" "The government? You betrayed me again." The line went dead. "All teams, Coleman knows," Raymond announced. "Extract immediately." In the complex, chaos erupted. Coleman's followers, about 15 men and women, grabbed weapons and ran toward the barracks. But the families were already in the tunnel, the FBI team creating a defensive line behind them. "Federal agents," Albert announced over a megaphone. "Samuel Coleman, you're surrounded. Release your weapons and surrender." Coleman's voice echoed through the complex's PA system. "You've forced my hand. I'm releasing the chemical weapons. Everyone above ground in a 5-mile radius will die." The families in the tunnel panicked, some trying to turn back, terrified of surfacing into contamination. Vernon and other agents worked to calm them, explaining the weapons were harmless. But Coleman's followers believed him. Several dropped their weapons, unwilling to be part of mass murder. Others seemed eager for the apocalyptic confrontation their leader had promised. Leonard Pike, one of the tactical specialists, had an idea. "Sir, if we can show them the weapons are inert, prove Coleman has been lying to them too." Raymond made a risky decision. "Eugene, broadcast on their frequency. Tell them the truth about the weapons." Eugene's voice filled the complex. "Attention, Coleman's followers. The chemical weapons were neutralized in 1968 under Operation Chase. Check military records, batch numbers CW4471 through CW4489. Your leader has been lying to you. There is no chemical threat." The doubt was immediate and visible. Coleman's most trusted lieutenant, a man named Marcus Webb, lowered his weapon. "Sam, is this true?" Coleman emerged from the command center, an M16 rifle in his hands. At 68, he still cut an imposing figure, over 6 feet tall, gray beard, eyes blazing with fanatic fervor. "They're lying," he shouted. "This is exactly what I warned you about. Government deception." But Marcus had already found one of the chemical bombs, checking its batch number. CW4478. "Sam, it's on their list." The psychological foundation of Coleman's kingdom crumbled in real time. His followers, realizing they'd been deceived not just about the outside world, but about their own capabilities, began laying down weapons. Coleman, seeing his world collapse, made a desperate move. He ran toward the tunnel where the families were escaping, perhaps thinking he could seal it, trap them underground. Albert's team moved to intercept. The confrontation was brief. Coleman, despite his military training from 40 years ago, was no match for current FBI tactical officers. He was on the ground, zip-tied, within seconds. "You don't understand," he screamed as they restrained him. "The collapse is still coming. Economic, social, political. I was protecting them." "You were imprisoning them," Raymond said, standing over him, "based on fears and lies." The extraction took 3 hours total. All 35 family members were brought to the surface, medical teams checking each one. Most were physically healthy. Coleman had taken good care of their bodies, if not their minds. The psychological damage would take longer to assess. Coleman's followers were arrested, though charges would vary based on their level of involvement. Some were victims themselves, drawn into Coleman's orbit by their own fears and traumas. As dawn broke over the Texas Panhandle, the 7 families stood in the parking area of the old base, seeing the sun for the first time in days or weeks. Children cried, some from joy, others from confusion. Parents held each other, processing the magnitude of what had happened to them. Jim Henderson approached Raymond. "Agent Garrett, how do we go back to normal after this? How do we trust anyone?" "You take it one day at a time," Raymond replied. "The Bureau will provide counseling, support. You're victims of a crime, not participants in it." But Rebecca Henderson had a different question. Why did we believe him? Why were we so ready to think the world was ending? It was Howard who answered. Because fear is powerful, especially when it speaks to anxieties we already carry. Coleman didn't create your fears. He exploited them. The economic uncertainties, social changes, political tensions you were already worried about. He just gave those fears a face and a solution. The compound was secured as a crime scene. Investigators would spend weeks cataloging Coleman's preparations. The supplies, weapons, detailed plans for rebuilding civilization according to his vision. It was impressive in its thoroughness and terrifying in its delusion. Sarah Coleman asked to see her father before he was transported to federal custody. The meeting was brief, observed by agents. "I tried to save them," Coleman said, his voice broken. "Everything I predicted is still coming true. The debt crisis, the social breakdown, the government overreach." "Maybe some of it is," Sarah replied. "But Dad, you can't save people by imprisoning them. You can't protect them by lying to them. You became the thing you claimed to be fighting against, a tyrant." Coleman had no response to that. The media coverage was intense but carefully managed. The FBI released a statement about a survivalist group that held multiple families under false pretenses. No mention was made of chemical weapons to avoid public panic. Coleman would be charged with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and numerous weapons violations. But the real work was just beginning. The 7 families needed to rebuild their lives, repair relationships with extended family and friends who'd thought they were dead. The children needed to return to schools, explaining absences that made no sense. Timothy Hutchinson, the teenager whose escape had triggered the rescue, struggled with guilt. "I should have gotten out sooner. I should have tried to bring others." "You did exactly right," Raymond assured him. "You survived, you got help, and because of you, everyone is free." Vernon coordinated with local services to help the families reintegrate. Some would stay in the area, determined to reclaim their normal lives. Others would move, unable to remain where the nightmare had happened. The Brennans decided to stay. "This is our land," Thomas Brennan said. "4 generations of my family have worked this ranch. I'm not letting Coleman take that from us, too." But they filled in the bunker, removed all traces of the preparations they'd made for an apocalypse that existed only in one man's mind. Lloyd, examining the medical and psychological data, made an observation that haunted Raymond. Coleman created a perfect closed system. Control the information, create the threat, provide the solution. These families never stood a chance once they trusted him. How many other Colemans are out there, Clarence wondered. How many other underground kingdoms waiting for an apocalypse? It was a question without an answer. The FBI would increase monitoring of survivalist groups, particularly those with charismatic leaders and isolation tendencies. But in a country founded on individual freedom, the line between preparation and paranoia, between community and cult, remained dangerously thin. 3 months later, Raymond received a letter from Rebecca Henderson. She was back in school, doing well, planning to study psychology in college. "I want to understand," she wrote, "how we can believe things that aren't true, and how we can help others see reality when they're lost in someone else's vision." She included a photo from her family's Thanksgiving dinner. All the Hendersons were there, along with extended family, friends, neighbors. They looked normal, happy even. But Raymond could see it in their eyes. The shadow of what they'd experienced. The knowledge of how quickly normal life could become a nightmare. Coleman was convicted on all charges, sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. At his sentencing, he gave a long speech about the coming collapse, the failure of society, the blindness of those who refused to prepare. The judge cut him off halfway through. His followers received lighter sentences, most getting probation with mandatory counseling. Marcus Webb, his lieutenant, publicly renounced Coleman's ideology and started speaking to other survivalist groups about the dangers of isolation and paranoia. Sarah Coleman returned to her life in Oklahoma City but stayed in touch with some of the families. She started a support group for relatives of people caught in survivalist or extremist groups, sharing resources for intervention before isolation became imprisonment. The abandoned military base was permanently sealed, the underground complex filled with concrete. The land was transferred to the state, eventually becoming part of a wind farm, generating power instead of paranoia. But Raymond knew the real monument to the case wasn't physical. It was the 35 people who'd been returned to their lives, the children who would grow up in sunlight instead of darkness, the families who'd learned the hard way that the real threat to their world wasn't external catastrophe, but internal delusion. Standing at the site 1 year later, now covered with wind turbines turning lazily in the Texas breeze, Raymond thought about fear and trust, about the thin line between caution and paranoia. Coleman had been wrong about the apocalypse, but he'd been right about one thing. The world was full of dangers. The difference was that most people faced those dangers in the open, together, rather than hiding underground, alone with their fears. The 7 families had survived not because they'd hidden from the world, but because people in that world, law enforcement, a brave teenager, even Coleman's estranged daughter, had worked to bring them back to it. That, Raymond thought, was the real preparation for whatever challenges lay ahead. Not bunkers and weapons, but connections and community, truth and trust. The courage to face reality as it was rather than as fear imagined it to be. 6 months after the rescue, Raymond received an urgent call from Eugene Martinez. The cybercrime specialist had been monitoring extremist communications as part of the ongoing surveillance program established after the Coleman incident. "Raymond, we have a problem. Someone's been posting detailed information about the Coleman operation on encrypted forums. Information that was never made public." Raymond drove to the Dallas field office where Eugene had set up a secure workstation. The posts were sophisticated, using multiple proxy servers and encryption layers. But the content was undeniably accurate. Details about the underground complex, the chemical weapons deception, even the names of the 7 families. "Who knows this much?" Raymond asked. "That's what worries me. This has to be someone from inside, either one of Coleman's followers or—" Eugene hesitated. "Or one of the families," Raymond finished. They traced the posts to a coffee shop in Amarillo that offered free Wi-Fi. Security footage showed a familiar face, Rebecca Henderson, now 18 and in her first semester at West Texas A&M University. Raymond and Clarence drove to Amarillo immediately. They found Rebecca in her dorm room, surrounded by psychology textbooks and printed articles about cult dynamics. She didn't seem surprised to see them. "I wondered when you'd trace it back to me," she said calmly. "Rebecca, why?" Raymond asked. "Those details were classified for the family's protection." "Protection?" Rebecca's calm facade cracked. "Agent Garrett, do you know what happened to the other families? The Walkers moved to California and joined another survivalist group. The Brennans are stockpiling supplies again, just more carefully. Half the families are right back where they started, just with different paranoia." She showed them a notebook filled with her research. "I've been studying this: Stockholm Syndrome, trauma bonding, cult psychology. We weren't just victims of Coleman, we were primed for him. Our families were chosen because we were already susceptible." "That doesn't explain the posts," Clarence said. "I'm trying to warn others," Rebecca explained. "There are dozens of groups like Coleman's forming right now. The economic recession has people scared. They're looking for strongmen with simple answers. If they know what happened to us, maybe they'll think twice." Raymond understood her motivation, but the execution was dangerous. "Rebecca, you've potentially compromised ongoing investigations, and you've put yourself at risk. Coleman still has supporters who might target you." As if to emphasize his point, Eugene called. "We've got a situation." Rebecca's posts triggered responses. Someone claiming to be part of Coleman's network says they have one of the families. The message was simple. Coleman was right. We have the Johnsons. Trade Coleman for them. The Johnson family, parents and 2 young children, had been one of the 7 rescued families. They'd moved to Oklahoma after the incident, trying to start fresh. Now they were missing again. Vernon coordinated with Oklahoma law enforcement while Howard analyzed the kidnapper's message. The language patterns match Marcus Webb, Coleman's former lieutenant. But he's supposed to be in custody. A quick check revealed Webb had been released 2 weeks earlier, his ankle monitor showing him at his approved residence, but the device had been tampered with, broadcasting a false signal while Webb disappeared. Lloyd pulled Webb's recent communications from his monitored accounts. Before disappearing, he'd been in contact with several former Coleman followers who'd avoided prosecution. They called themselves the Prepared, and believed Coleman had been a prophet silenced by the government. The kidnappers' demands were specific: Coleman's release and safe passage to Mexico. They gave the FBI 48 hours. In the federal prison in Fort Worth, Samuel Coleman sat in an interview room across from Raymond. 6 months in custody had aged him. His beard was whiter, his frame thinner, but his eyes still burned with conviction. "I heard about the Johnsons," Coleman said. "This isn't my doing." "But it's being done in your name," Raymond countered. "Call off your people." Coleman laughed bitterly. "My people? Agent Garrett, you destroyed my community. What's happening now is just desperate individuals grasping at shadows of what we built. Then help us stop them. The Johnsons have young children." Something flickered in Coleman's eyes, perhaps a remnant of humanity beneath the paranoia. Webb always was too aggressive. I had to restrain him constantly, without my influence. "He's becoming what you pretended to be," Raymond said. "A real threat." Coleman was quiet for a moment. There's a place we prepared in case the primary complex was compromised. An old mine in the Wichita Mountains. Webb knew about it. Armed with this intelligence, tactical teams mobilized for Oklahoma. The abandoned copper mine Coleman described was 60 miles from where the Johnsons had been taken. Drone surveillance confirmed recent activity. Vehicles hidden under camouflage netting, fresh tire tracks, and heat signatures indicating multiple people inside. Albert Reeds led the tactical response. This time, there would be no elaborate deception. Webb and his group were genuinely dangerous, likely armed, and holding innocent hostages. Eugene hacked into Webb's communications, discovering he had 4 accomplices, all former Coleman followers who'd evaded initial arrest. They'd spent months planning this, studying the FBI's response to the original incident, learning from Coleman's mistakes. But Webb had made his own mistake. He'd kept his phone, believing encryption made it safe. Eugene traced its signal to a specific chamber within the mine. The assault came at dawn. Unlike Coleman's complex, the mine had limited exits. FBI agents secured all known entrances, while a specialized team entered through a ventilation shaft Rebecca's information had revealed. She'd remembered Coleman discussing the backup site during their captivity. The Johnsons were found in the first chamber, physically unharmed but terrified. Mrs. Johnson clutched her children, tears streaming down her face. They said Coleman warned this would happen, that the government would come for us again. Webb and his accomplices were deeper in the mine, in a fortified position. They'd learned from Coleman's quick surrender, preparing for a siege. "Federal agents," Albert announced. "Marcus Webb, you're surrounded. Release your weapons and surrender." Webb's response came over a bullhorn. "Coleman saw the truth. The economic collapse is accelerating. The government is building camps. We're trying to save people." Howard, monitoring the situation, noted something crucial. They're not suicidal. They're true believers, but they want to survive to spread their message. Use that. Raymond took over negotiations. "Marcus, you say you want to save people? The Johnsons are safe now. You've made your point. Surrender, and you can tell your story in court. Die here, and Coleman's message dies with you." The standoff lasted 6 hours. Webb's accomplices gradually lost faith as the reality of their situation sank in. One by one, they surrendered, leaving Webb alone in his fortified position. Finally, exhausted and recognizing the futility, Webb emerged. As they arrested him, he said to Raymond, "You think you've won, but Coleman planted seeds. Every economic downturn, every government overreach, every social crisis waters those seeds. We'll keep growing." The Johnsons were reunited with extended family and immediately entered witness protection. The trauma of being targeted twice was too much. They needed to completely disappear, this time with government help. Rebecca Henderson watched news of the rescue from her dorm room. She'd inadvertently triggered the kidnapping with her posts, and the guilt was crushing. She called Raymond. "This is my fault," she said. "I thought exposing the truth would help." "Webb would have acted eventually," Raymond assured her. "Your information actually helped us find them faster. But Rebecca, you need to be more careful. The truth is powerful, but it needs to be wielded responsibly." She made a decision that would define her future. She changed her major from psychology to criminal justice, focusing on cult dynamics and deprogramming. She wanted to help people escape situations like her family had faced, but legally, properly. Meanwhile, the case had attracted the attention of Dr. Kenneth Lowe, a sociologist studying American extremist movements. He interviewed the captured families, Coleman's followers, and law enforcement involved in both incidents. "What you're seeing," he explained to Raymond, "is the metastasization of paranoid ideology." Coleman was the primary tumor, but his ideas spread to susceptible hosts. Each new group learns from the previous one's failures, evolving, adapting. His research revealed a disturbing pattern. Across the country, dozens of similar groups were forming. Not all were violent, but they shared common characteristics: charismatic leaders, isolation from mainstream society, preparation for various apocalyptic scenarios, and increasing hostility toward government authority. The FBI established a task force specifically for monitoring these groups. Vernon was recruited to lead the Texas division, his experience with the Coleman case invaluable. They developed protocols for identifying when preparedness crossed into dangerous extremism. Lloyd, analyzing medical data from the rescued families, made a disturbing discovery. Many showed signs of chronic stress disorders that predated their captivity. Coleman didn't create their anxiety, he reported. He found people already suffering and offered them a solution that made it worse. This led to a partnership with mental health services. Communities with high unemployment, recent natural disasters, or social upheaval would receive additional counseling resources, addressing the fear before someone like Coleman could exploit it. Ernest Valdez, who'd been part of the tactical team, transferred to community outreach. He started giving presentations to rural communities about the warning signs of extremist recruitment. His message was simple: preparation is smart, isolation is dangerous, community is strength. Coleman, in prison, continued to write. His letters to Sarah stopped, but he found new audiences, other inmates, extremist publications, anyone who would listen. The Bureau monitored his communications, but First Amendment protections limited their ability to silence him completely. One letter, intercepted and analyzed, was particularly chilling. "They think they've won by caging me, but ideas can't be imprisoned." Every family struggling to pay bills, every person who distrusts the evening news, every American who feels the country slipping away, they're all potential soldiers in the war for truth. My body is confined, but my vision spreads like wildfire through dry grass. Sarah Coleman, reading her father's published writings, saw the danger clearly. She started a counter-narrative campaign, using her unique position as Coleman's daughter to reach those who might listen to his message. "My father was right about one thing," she would say in her speeches. "The world can be scary. Economic uncertainty is real. Social change is disorienting." But his solution, hiding underground, living in fear, trusting only him, that wasn't salvation. It was another form of death. Real strength comes from facing challenges together, in the light, with truth instead of paranoia. The 7 families continued their recovery with varying success. The Hendersons thrived, Jim returning to ranching while Martha became a counselor for cult survivors. Rebecca excelled in her studies, eventually earning internships with the FBI. The Brennans struggled more. They couldn't shake the feeling that Coleman had been partially right, that catastrophe was always imminent. They maintained emergency supplies but forced themselves to stay engaged with their community, fighting the urge to isolate. The Walkers, who'd briefly joined another group in California, eventually found balance. They became advocates for responsible preparedness, teaching emergency skills without the paranoia, building community resilience without isolation. The other families maintained their privacy, slowly rebuilding lives disrupted by one man's vision of apocalypse. Some succeeded, others struggled, all carried scars both visible and hidden. A year after Webb's capture, Raymond stood in the Deaf-Smith County Courthouse, testifying at Webb's trial. The man showed no remorse. using his testimony to spread Coleman's ideology. He was convicted on all counts, sentenced to 20 years. Outside the courthouse, Raymond met Jim Henderson, who'd come to watch the trial. "Do you think it's over?" Jim asked. "This chapter is," Raymond replied. But Webb was right about one thing. Coleman planted seeds. Our job is to make sure they don't take root, that fear doesn't overcome reason, that preparation doesn't become paranoia. Jim nodded, looking out over the Texas plains. "You know what I learned underground? The thing that scared me most wasn't the collapse Coleman predicted. It was how easily I believed him, how quickly I gave up my judgment to someone who claimed to have answers. That's the real danger. Not the disaster outside, but the fear inside that makes us vulnerable to anyone promising safety." Raymond thought about those words often in the following years. The Coleman case had revealed a vulnerability in American society, not to external threats, but to internal fears, exploited by those claiming special knowledge. It wasn't enough to rescue people from underground bunkers. Society needed to address the anxieties that drove them there in the first place. The abandoned military base was eventually developed into a solar farm, generating power from the same sun Coleman had taught his followers to fear. It seemed fitting, transformation of a site of paranoia into one of productivity, darkness into light, fear into hope. But Raymond knew the struggle continued. Somewhere, another Coleman was gathering followers. Another underground kingdom was being built. Another group of families was being convinced that salvation lay in isolation rather than community. The FBI could respond to crimes, conduct rescues, arrest perpetrators. But preventing the fear that made people vulnerable, that required a different kind of vigilance, one that every citizen had to maintain. Standing at the solar farm's dedication ceremony, watching the panels track the sun across the Texas sky, Raymond thought about the thin line between reasonable caution and destructive paranoia. Coleman had crossed that line, dragging 35 people with him into darkness. But they'd been brought back, not by force alone, but by the patient work of people who refused to let fear win. The families were free, the conspirators imprisoned, the immediate threat ended. But the underlying challenge remained: how to prepare for genuine uncertainties without succumbing to manufactured terrors. How to build community resilience without isolation. How to face the future with eyes open but not paralyzed by fear. 2 years had passed since the Coleman incident when Raymond received a call that would reveal the true extent of the conspiracy's reach. It came from Rebecca Henderson, now 20, and working as an intern with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit while finishing her degree. "Agent Garrett, I found something in Coleman's old letters. Something everyone missed. They met in Dallas, where Rebecca spread out dozens of Coleman's writings across a conference table. She'd been analyzing them for patterns as part of her thesis on extremist recruitment techniques. Look at these dates," she said, highlighting specific passages. Coleman mentions the network repeatedly, starting 5 years before he took the families. He wasn't working alone, he was part of something larger. Raymond studied the letters. Coleman had been careful, but the references were there. Coordination with other groups, shared resources, a distributed structure designed to survive if one cell was compromised. "We need to inform the task force," Raymond said. But Rebecca had more. "I cross-referenced Coleman's references with missing persons reports from the last decade. Look at this pattern." She showed him a map with red pins marking disappearances. They formed clusters around remote areas in 7 states: Texas, Montana, Idaho, Oregon, Arizona, New Mexico, and Wyoming. Each cluster had between 20 and 50 missing persons, all fitting the same profile as Coleman's chosen families. Eugene Martinez confirmed Rebecca's findings through digital forensics. "I've found encrypted communications between Coleman and at least 6 other group leaders. They called it the Preservation Project, a coordinated effort to establish underground communities before an anticipated collapse." The scope was staggering. If each group had taken as many people as Coleman, they were looking at potentially hundreds of missing persons incorrectly classified as voluntary disappearances. Director Thompson authorized a multi-state operation. Raymond would lead the Texas investigation, but similar teams were deployed across the identified states. The operation was codenamed Daylight, bringing hidden communities into the light. The first breakthrough came in Montana. Following Coleman's communication patterns, agents located a compound run by a former Marine named Joseph Hartley. Unlike Coleman's underground complex, Hartley had built an above-ground fortress in the mountains, complete with guard towers and defensive positions. Vernon, now an expert in extremist group dynamics, joined the Montana operation. Hartley's more militaristic than Coleman. His group calls themselves the Constitutional Guard. They believe the federal government is illegitimate and they're the true patriots preserving American values. Surveillance revealed 43 people in the compound, including 15 children. Some were there voluntarily, true believers in Hartley's vision. Others showed signs of being held against their will, always accompanied, never allowed near the perimeter. The challenge was different from Coleman's situation. Hartley's compound was legally purchased land. Without evidence of crimes, the FBI couldn't simply raid it. They needed probable cause. That came from an unexpected source. One of Hartley's followers, a young woman named Jennifer Mills, managed to call her sister during a supply run to town. The brief call was enough. "They won't let me leave. Please help." Howard analyzed the compound's psychological structure. Hartley uses military discipline as control. Everyone has ranks, duties, scheduled activities from dawn to dusk. It's designed to eliminate independent thought through exhaustion and routine. The raid was planned for dawn, when the compound would be at its most vulnerable. But Hartley had learned from Coleman's capture. He had early warning systems, cameras, motion sensors. The element of surprise was impossible. So they tried something different. Lloyd suggested using Hartley's military background against him. He'll respect military protocol, have a veteran negotiate, someone who speaks his language. They brought in Colonel James Patterson, retired Army, who'd served in the same unit as Hartley 20 years earlier. Patterson approached the compound's gate openly, in full-dress uniform. "Joseph Hartley," he called out. "Colonel Patterson here. Request permission to enter for parley." It worked. Hartley's military conditioning responded to proper protocol. He allowed Patterson to enter, though surrounded by armed guards. Inside, Patterson saw what surveillance had missed. The compound was falling apart. Food shortages, medical issues, growing dissent among followers. Hartley's paradise was becoming a prison even for true believers. "Joe," Patterson said, using Hartley's old military nickname, "your people are suffering. Children are sick. This isn't the America you swore to protect." Hartley's facade cracked. "They're weak. The strong will survive, rebuild after the collapse." "What collapse, Joe? It's been 5 years. The world outside is fine. You're fighting a war that doesn't exist." The conversation lasted 3 hours, with Patterson slowly chipping away at Hartley's delusions. Finally, faced with the reality of sick children and exhausted followers, Hartley agreed to let anyone who wanted to leave go freely. 28 people chose to leave immediately, including all the children. Hartley and 14 hardcore followers remained, but without hostages, their threat was neutralized. Local law enforcement would monitor them, intervene if laws were broken, but respect their right to their beliefs as long as they didn't harm others. The Montana success provided a template for other operations. In Oregon, they found a group that had already collapsed, the leader dead from untreated diabetes, followers scattered, only empty buildings remaining. In Idaho, a community of 36 people was successfully extracted after their leader was arrested for tax evasion, the Al Capone approach, as Eugene called it. But the Arizona situation was different. The group there, led by a woman named Patricia Stone, had evolved beyond Coleman's model. They'd established a functional community, solar power, water recycling, sustainable agriculture. The 112 people there weren't prisoners. They were participants in what appeared to be a successful commune. Albert, leading the Arizona reconnaissance, reported back, "No weapons beyond hunting rifles, no military structure. Kids are being educated. People seem healthy. If it weren't for the isolation and the apocalyptic beliefs, it would be admirable." This presented an ethical dilemma. If people chose to live separately, preparing for disasters that might never come, was that criminal? Where was the line between freedom of association and dangerous extremism? The answer came from within the community itself. 3 teenagers reaching 18 wanted to leave for college. Stone refused, claiming the outside world would corrupt them. Their parents, torn between loyalty to Stone and love for their children, secretly contacted authorities. Raymond led negotiations with Stone. She was different from Coleman or Hartley. No military background, no obvious paranoia. She was a former Silicon Valley executive who'd become convinced that technology would destroy humanity. "You're not wrong about technology's dangers," Raymond said during one conversation. "But isolating your community doesn't protect them. It makes them more vulnerable. Your teenagers have no immunity to the outside world. If they encounter it unprepared, it will destroy them." Stone eventually agreed to a compromise. The community would remain but establish connections with the outside world. The teenagers could leave for education but return if they chose. Regular welfare checks would ensure no one was held against their will. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it respected both individual freedom and child welfare. The community still exists today, though less isolated. Some members leaving, others joining, evolving from a cult into an intentional community. The New Mexico investigation revealed the darkest variant of the preservation project. The group there, led by Dr. Richard Morse, had been conducting medical experiments on followers, claiming to develop immunity to biological weapons they believed the government would deploy. Clarence led this operation, discovering a horror that surpassed even Coleman's delusions. 38 people, including 9 children, showing signs of malnutrition, untreated diseases, and exposure to various experimental vaccines that were actually dangerous combinations of industrial chemicals. There was no negotiation here. Tactical teams stormed the compound, arrested Morse and his inner circle, and evacuated everyone for immediate medical treatment. 3 children were in critical condition. 1 elderly follower died en route to the hospital. Morse showed no remorse during interrogation. "I was trying to save them. The weak die, so the strong survive. That's evolution." He was charged with murder, assault, child endangerment, and practicing medicine without a license. His trial became a sensation, exposing the dangerous intersection of extremist ideology and pseudoscience. The Wyoming group had disappeared entirely. Coleman's communications suggested a community of 60 people, led by someone called the Prophet. But ground searches found only abandoned buildings and evidence of a hasty evacuation. Leonard, analyzing the scene, found something disturbing. They didn't just leave. They were moving deeper, literally. These excavation marks suggest they're building something underground, but much deeper than Coleman ever went. Geological surveys revealed a massive cave system beneath the area. The group had apparently moved their entire community underground, so deep that conventional detection methods couldn't locate them. They could be anywhere in hundreds of miles of caves, Vernon said. Without more intelligence, we'll never find them. The Wyoming group remains missing to this day, their fate unknown. Sometimes hikers report strange sounds from below ground, supplies disappearing from remote cabins, but no confirmed sightings. They've become legend, the vanished ones, as locals call them. With the multi-state operation complete, the FBI had rescued or accounted for over 300 people from various extremist compounds. But the investigation revealed a disturbing truth. The Preservation Project was just one network among many. Rebecca, now a full FBI analyst, created a database of extremist groups. There are approximately 200 similar communities across the country. Most are harmless. Preppers, intentional communities, religious groups seeking separation. But about 10% show concerning signs: isolation, authoritarian leadership, apocalyptic ideology. Howard developed an assessment tool to evaluate threat levels. Groups were rated on multiple factors: weapons accumulation, child welfare, financial exploitation, forced retention of members. This allowed law enforcement to prioritize resources, focusing on genuinely dangerous groups while respecting lawful assembly. Coleman, in prison, learned about the dismantling of the Preservation Project through news reports. He requested a meeting with Raymond. "You think you've won," Coleman said, now 70, and showing signs of declining health. "But you've just delayed the inevitable. Every crisis, economic, environmental, social, proves I was right. The collapse is coming." "Maybe," Raymond replied, "but if it does, humanity will face it together, in the open, with truth and cooperation. Not hidden underground, paralyzed by fear, controlled by men like you." Coleman laughed bitterly. "Men like me? Agent Garrett, I'm everywhere. Every person who stocks extra food, who distrusts the media, who fears for their children's future, they're all potential me. You can't arrest an idea." "No," Raymond agreed. "But we can expose it to sunlight, show people alternatives to fear, build resilience through community rather than isolation." Their last conversation ended with Coleman making a chilling prediction. "Within 10 years, someone will succeed where I failed. They'll build a community so compelling, so perfectly timed with crisis, that people will beg to join. And you won't be able to stop it because it will all be legal, voluntary, even admirable, until it's too late." Sarah Coleman continued her work with cult survivors, eventually establishing a national network of support services. She wrote a book about her father, not to profit from tragedy but to help others recognize the warning signs of extremist recruitment. The 7 families from the original Coleman incident had varied outcomes. The Hendersons thrived, Jim becoming a spokesman for agricultural communities about extremist recruitment. Rebecca graduated with honors, joining the FBI full-time, specializing in cult dynamics. The Brennans found peace through faith, joining a mainstream church that provided community without isolation. The Walkers started a legitimate preparedness business, teaching practical emergency skills without paranoia. The other families maintained their privacy, quietly rebuilding lives interrupted by one man's delusions. Some succeeded fully, others struggled with trust. All carried invisible scars from their time underground. Marcus Webb died in prison, stabbed by another inmate during an argument about Coleman's ideology. His death ended the last direct threat from Coleman's immediate network, though sympathizers remained. The abandoned military base in Texas was fully remediated, toxic materials removed, bunkers filled. The land was donated to Texas parks and wildlife, becoming a nature preserve. Visitors today see only desert beauty, unaware of the darkness once hidden beneath. Ernest established a nonprofit organization focused on community resilience, teaching practical preparedness without paranoia, building networks of mutual support that could handle genuine crises without succumbing to extremist solutions. The task force Raymond led became a permanent division within the FBI, the Community Threat Assessment Unit. They monitor extremist groups, intervene when laws are broken, but also work with social services to address underlying anxieties that make people vulnerable to recruitment. 10 years after Coleman's arrest, Raymond retired from the FBI. At his retirement ceremony, Director Thompson said, "Agent Garrett didn't just solve cases. He saved lives, restored families, and showed us that the real threat isn't the disaster extremists predict, but the fear they cultivate." In retirement, Raymond occasionally lectures at Quantico, teaching new agents about the Coleman case. His key message is always the same. Extremism grows in isolation, thrives on fear, and exploits legitimate anxieties. Our job isn't just to arrest criminals, but to address the conditions that create them. Every person we bring back from the darkness, every family reunited, every community strengthened, that's our real victory. Rebecca Henderson, now Special Agent Henderson, carries on this work. She's developed new protocols for extracting people from extremist groups, emphasizing patience, understanding, and addressing the genuine fears that drove them there. Standing at the site of Coleman's former compound, now a solar farm generating clean energy, Rebecca reflects on the journey from darkness to light. The bunkers are gone, filled with concrete and covered with panels that track the sun. But she knows that somewhere, in some isolated corner of America, another Coleman is gathering followers. Another underground kingdom is being built. The difference now is that law enforcement is watching. Mental health services are available, and survivors like her are speaking out. The darkness Coleman represented hasn't been eliminated. It may never be entirely, but it's been exposed, understood, and countered with truth, community, and hope. The disappearing families were found, the conspiracy exposed, the network dismantled. But the underlying challenge remains: how to build a society resilient enough to face genuine challenges without succumbing to manufactured fears, strong enough to handle uncertainty without surrendering freedom to those who promise safety through isolation. Coleman was wrong about the collapse, but he was right about one thing: the future is uncertain. The question is whether humanity faces that uncertainty together, with courage and wisdom, or apart, paralyzed by fear and controlled by those who exploit it. The answer, Raymond believes, will determine not just individual futures, but the fate of democracy itself. The case is closed, the family saved, the immediate threat ended. But the vigilance continues, the work goes on, the light keeps pushing back the darkness, one rescued family at a time. The Permian Basin stretched endlessly under the scorching West Texas sun, a landscape of pump jacks nodding like mechanical birds, pipelines snaking through desert scrubland, and drilling rigs reaching toward cloudless skies. It was here, in the heart of America's oil country, that men came to make their fortunes, working brutal shifts in temperatures that could reach 115 degrees. And it was here, in the summer of 1991, that those same men began to vanish without a trace. Special Agent Lester McGraw received the call at 3:15 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon. He was at his desk in the FBI's Houston field office reviewing surveillance reports on a suspected money laundering operation, when his direct line rang. "McGraw," he answered, already reaching for a pen. "Lester, this is Director Harrison. I need you in Midland by tonight. We have a situation that requires someone with your particular background." Lester's background was unique within the Bureau. Before joining the FBI, he'd worked as a petroleum engineer for Exxon, spending 5 years on offshore rigs and in remote drilling operations. When the Bureau needed someone who understood the oil industry's complexities, they called him. "What's the situation, sir?" 17 oil workers have disappeared from various drilling sites across the Permian Basin over the past 6 weeks. No bodies, no ransom demands, no trace. Local law enforcement is overwhelmed, and the oil companies are starting to panic. 17 workers? That suggests organization. That's what we think. And Lester, there's something else. All 17 had specific skills. Drilling specialists, geological surveyors, engineers. Someone's building a team. The drive from Houston to Midland took Lester through some of the most desolate country in Texas. As he drove, he reviewed what he knew about the Permian Basin. It was the most productive oil field in the United States, but it was also a place where regulations were often ignored, where companies operated in legal gray areas, where massive amounts of money changed hands with minimal oversight. The FBI had established a command post at a hotel in downtown Midland. When Lester arrived, he found organized chaos. Agents from multiple field offices, representatives from major oil companies, and local law enforcement all trying to coordinate their efforts. Chester Rodriguez, an agent from the El Paso office, met him at the elevator. "Lester, glad you're here. This situation is getting more complex by the hour." "Fill me in," Lester said as Chester led him to the Situation Room. The walls were covered with maps of the Permian Basin, marked with red pins indicating disappearance sites. Photos of the missing workers were arranged on boards. 17 men of various ages and ethnicities, all with the weathered look of those who worked the oil fields. "First disappearance was 6 weeks ago," Chester began. "Rick Jameson, 32, derrick hand for Occidental Petroleum. Left for his night shift, never arrived. His truck was found parked on a service road about 5 miles from the site. Engine off, keys in the ignition. His lunch still on the passenger seat. Any signs of struggle? None. But here's where it gets interesting. Jameson had just completed specialized training in horizontal drilling techniques. He was one of maybe 50 guys in Texas certified in this new method. Lester studied the other missing workers' files. Each had specialized skills or knowledge that would be valuable to someone setting up an illegal drilling operation. Melvin Hayes, a senior investigator from the Texas Railroad Commission, which, despite its name, regulated oil and gas operations, entered with a grim expression. "Agents, we have a development. We've detected unauthorized drilling activity in Sector 7. That's federal land, supposed to be off limits." They drove through the desert night toward the coordinates Melvin had provided. The site was 40 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by dirt roads that weren't on any official maps. What they found was sophisticated. A complete drilling operation hidden in a box canyon, invisible from the air unless you knew exactly where to look. The equipment was modern, expensive, the kind of setup that cost millions. "This is a slant drilling operation," Melvin explained. "They're drilling at an angle to reach oil deposits under land they don't have rights to. It's theft on a massive scale." Virgil Thompson, a local sheriff's deputy who joined them, whistled low. "This equipment, someone invested serious money here." The site was abandoned when they arrived, but evidence suggested recent activity. Lester found a bunkhouse that could accommodate at least 20 people, a kitchen with fresh food, work schedules posted on walls with familiar names, the missing workers. Norman Walsh, the site's security assessment specialist, discovered something crucial. The communications equipment here is military grade. Encrypted radios, satellite uplinks. This isn't some wildcatter operation. This is organized crime. They spent hours documenting the site before Lester found what he was looking for: paperwork hidden in a locked filing cabinet. Shipping manifests, equipment purchases, and most importantly, pay stubs for the missing workers. They're not kidnap victims, Lester announced. They're employees. Someone recruited them for this illegal operation. But why disappear? Chester asked. Why not just quit their jobs normally? The answer came from Stanley Cooper, an analyst who'd been reviewing the workers' financial records. Each missing worker had serious debt: medical bills, mortgages in foreclosure, gambling debts. Someone offered them a way out. Big money for illegal work, but they had to disappear completely. The paperwork led to shell companies registered in Delaware, which led to more shell companies in the Cayman Islands. The money trail was sophisticated, designed to hide the true owners. But Lester recognized patterns in the operation: specific techniques, equipment preferences, even the way the site was organized. "I've seen this before," he said. "When I worked for Exxon, we competed against independent operators who used these exact methods. There was one man who was notorious for pushing legal boundaries: Marcus Whitmore. Whitmore was a Texas oil legend who'd made and lost fortunes multiple times. He'd been investigated for various schemes, but never convicted. His latest venture, Whitmore Energy Solutions, had gone bankrupt 6 months ago, right before the disappearances started. He's using the missing workers to drill illegally, stealing oil from federal land and probably from other companies' reserves," Lester explained. "The workers agreed to disappear because he's probably paying them 10 times their normal salary. Finding Whitmore would be the challenge. He'd dropped off the grid after his bankruptcy, and if he was running this operation, he'd taken precautions against being found." Chester had been working with informants in the oil community. "Word is, Whitmore's been recruiting more than just drilling crews. He's got accountants, lawyers, even former federal inspectors on his payroll. He's building a shadow oil company. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Virgil's cousin worked for a trucking company that hauled oil from various sites. He'd noticed unmarked tanker trucks running at night from areas where there shouldn't be any drilling. They're moving the stolen oil," Virgil reported, "probably mixing it with legitimate shipments, selling it through the regular market. No one would know it was illegally obtained." Following the trucking routes, they identified 3 more illegal drilling sites. Each was as sophisticated as the first, each staffed by workers who were supposedly missing. At the second site, they got lucky. The workers were still there when law enforcement arrived at dawn. 17 men, including 12 of the missing workers, were arrested without incident. Most seemed relieved to be caught. Rick Jameson, the first worker to disappear, was among them. In interrogation, he painted a picture of desperation turned to entrapment. "Whitmore's people approached me when I was at my lowest," Jameson explained. "My daughter needed cancer treatment. Insurance wouldn't cover experimental therapy. They offered me $200,000 cash up front to work for 6 months. All I had to do was disappear, tell no one, work the illegal sites. Why didn't you leave when you realized what was happening?" They had leverage. Videos of us at the illegal sites, documents with our signatures. They said if anyone left early, they'd frame us as the masterminds, make sure we went to prison for 20 years. The other workers told similar stories. Desperate men offered impossible amounts of money. then trapped by evidence of their participation in crimes. Norman had been analyzing the financial structure. This is bigger than just Whitmore. Based on the money flow, there's a cartel connection. They're financing the operation, using it to launder money while also profiting from the stolen oil. This changed everything. If Mexican cartels were involved, the missing workers were in more danger than anyone had realized. Stanley discovered the connection through banking records. The Juarez cartel has been moving money through Texas oil companies for years. When Whitmore went bankrupt, they didn't lose their investment. They recruited him to run this operation. The race was now on to find Whitmore before the cartel realized their operation was blown. If they decided the workers were liabilities, 17 men could end up dead. Melvin used his connections in the oil industry to trace equipment purchases. Whitmore's buying supplies through a company in Odessa. The owner is his former partner, who supposedly cut ties after the bankruptcy. Surveillance on the partner, David Chen, revealed he was still in contact with Whitmore. Following Chen led them to a ranch house outside Fort Stockton, where thermal imaging showed multiple heat signatures. The raid was coordinated with DEA, ATF, and local SWAT teams. They hit the ranch at 4 a.m., when resistance would be minimal. Whitmore was there, along with 5 remaining missing workers and several cartel associates. The arrest was textbook. No shots fired, everyone taken into custody alive. In interrogation, Whitmore was defiant. "You think you've stopped something? There are dozens of operations like mine." The cartels have figured out that oil is better than drugs. Legal product, easier to move, harder to trace. "Where are the other missing workers?" Lester demanded. Whitmore's lawyer advised him not to answer, but something in Lester's expression made him reconsider. "2 are in Mexico, guests of my business partners. 3 quit early, and I don't know where they went." The 2 workers in Mexico presented a challenge. They were being held by the cartel as insurance, ensuring Whitmore's cooperation. Extracting them would require State Department involvement and Mexican cooperation. Chester worked with Mexican federal police contacts. The workers are at a compound outside Juarez. The cartel doesn't know we've rolled up the operation yet. If we move fast, we might get them out. The rescue operation was joint. Mexican federales handling the assault while FBI agents waited at the border to take custody. It worked. The 2 workers were recovered alive, traumatized but unharmed. That left 3 workers still missing. Whitmore claimed ignorance, but phone records suggested otherwise. He'd been in contact with someone in California the day those 3 workers disappeared. Following that lead revealed the darkest part of the conspiracy. The 3 workers hadn't quit. They'd discovered that Whitmore was planning to eliminate all witnesses once the operation was complete. They'd fled, but Whitmore had sent cartel sicarios after them. 1 worker, Michael Torres, was found dead in a Los Angeles motel. The other 2, brothers named James and William Park, had managed to hide, constantly moving, staying off-grid. Lester coordinated with the U.S. Marshals to find and protect the Park brothers. They were located in Seattle, living under assumed names, terrified the cartel would find them. "We thought we were just taking oil field jobs," James Park said when they were brought into protective custody. "We didn't know about the cartel, the money laundering, any of it until we were in too deep." With all 17 workers accounted for, 14 alive, 3 dead, the case moved to prosecution. Whitmore was charged with conspiracy, theft of federal resources, money laundering, and murder for the 3 dead workers. The cartel members arrested at the ranch faced federal charges that would keep them imprisoned for decades. But everyone knew they were replaceable. The cartel would send others. The illegal drilling sites were shut down, the equipment confiscated. The stolen oil was traced through the supply chain, companies that had unknowingly purchased it cooperating with authorities to calculate damages. Melvin worked to strengthen regulations. We need better monitoring of drilling activity, especially on federal lands. Satellite surveillance, regular inspections, severe penalties for companies that don't report suspicious activity. The surviving workers faced their own legal challenges. While they were victims of exploitation, they had participated in crimes. Plea deals were offered. Testimony against Whitmore and the cartel in exchange for reduced sentences, mostly probation and fines. Rick Jameson, whose daughter's medical bills had started his involvement, received community service. The judge recognized the impossible position he'd been placed in. His daughter's treatment was successful, though paid for with tainted money he'd have to repay over time. The case revealed vulnerabilities in the oil industry that went beyond this single conspiracy. The combination of valuable resources, complex regulations, and desperate workers created opportunities for organized crime to infiltrate legitimate business. The aftermath of the initial arrests brought unexpected revelations. During a detailed search of Whitmore's ranch, agents discovered a hidden room containing detailed records of not just his operation, but connections to similar schemes across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. Stanley Cooper spent days analyzing the documents. "This isn't just one operation," he reported to the task force. "It's a network." The cartels have been systematically infiltrating the oil industry, using desperate workers and corrupt operators to steal millions of barrels. The scope was staggering. According to Whitmore's records, at least 40 illegal drilling operations were active across the Southwest, employing hundreds of workers who were either missing persons or illegal immigrants with no official existence in the United States. Lester coordinated with field offices in affected states. "We need a coordinated strike. If we hit them piecemeal, they'll scatter, destroy evidence, possibly kill witnesses." The operation, codenamed Black Gold, would become one of the largest FBI operations in the Southwest. 300 agents, working with local law enforcement and regulatory agencies, would simultaneously raid suspected sites. But first, they needed more intelligence. The surviving workers from Whitmore's operation became crucial sources. Rick Jameson, facing his own legal troubles but cooperating fully, revealed details about recruitment methods. They had spotters at unemployment offices, bankruptcy courts, hospitals, Jameson explained. They looked for skilled workers in desperate situations. Once they identified targets, they'd make contact through intermediaries, never directly traceable to the cartels. Chester tracked down one of these recruiters, a former HR manager named Patricia Gonzalez, who'd lost her legitimate job during the oil bust of the late 1980s. She was arrested at her El Paso apartment, her computer containing files on hundreds of potential recruits. "I told myself I was helping people," Patricia said during interrogation. "These men needed work, had families to feed. I didn't think about where the jobs were coming from." Her files revealed the full network: recruiters in 12 cities, safe houses for workers in transition, even medical clinics that treated injured workers off the books to avoid official reports. Melvin Hayes discovered another disturbing aspect. They're not just stealing oil, they're contaminating legitimate supplies. Some of these illegal operations don't follow safety protocols. We've got sulfur contamination, water table pollution. They're poisoning the land for quick profit. Environmental crimes added another dimension to the investigation. The EPA joined the task force, bringing resources to test soil and water near suspected sites. Norman Walsh had been working with oil company security departments. the companies have been covering up losses to avoid spooking investors. Occidental alone estimates they've lost $40 million in stolen oil, but they never reported it. This corporate complicity complicated prosecutions. If companies knew about theft but didn't report it, they could be liable for securities fraud for misleading shareholders. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the Park brothers, William, remembered overhearing a conversation about the main depot. They talked about a place where all the stolen oil gets processed, William said. Somewhere near the border where they can mix it with Mexican oil, make it impossible to trace. Surveillance flights identified a suspicious facility near Presidio, Texas, just across from Ojinaga, Mexico. Satellite imagery showed tanker trucks arriving at night from multiple directions, a pattern consistent with consolidating stolen product. The facility was owned by a company called Desert Sun Petroleum, registered to a man named Carlos Mendoza. But Mendoza didn't exist. The identity was fabricated, the company a front. Virgil Thompson, whose local knowledge had been invaluable, recognized the location. That used to be the old Presidio refinery, shut down in '85, supposedly abandoned, but locals say they see lights there at night, hear machinery. A reconnaissance team confirmed the facility was operational. Not just operational, it was a full-scale oil laundering operation. Stolen oil came in, got mixed with legitimate Mexican imports, then entered the U.S. market with proper documentation. The raid on the Presidio facility required international coordination. Mexican authorities would simultaneously hit the Ojinaga side, while U.S. forces took the Texas facility. At 3 a.m. on a moonless night, the operation commenced. FBI, DEA, and Border Patrol agents surrounded the facility, while Mexican federal police crossed the bridge from Ojinaga. The facility manager, caught sleeping in his office, was actually Roberto Delgado, a cartel lieutenant wanted for murder in Mexico. His arrest alone was a major victory. But the real prize was the facility's records. Despite attempts to destroy evidence, computers wiped, papers burned, forensic accountants recovered enough to map the entire network. They were moving 200,000 barrels a month, Stanley reported. At current prices, that's $15 million in stolen oil monthly. The records also contained something unexpected: payments to legitimate oil company employees. The conspiracy went deeper than independent operators like Whitmore. They had inside help. Lester focused on these corporate connections. 3 names appeared repeatedly, all mid-level executives at major oil companies who could manipulate inventory records to hide losses. The first, George Patterson at Chevron, was arrested at his Houston office. His job in logistics allowed him to alter shipping records, making stolen oil appear legitimate. They had my son, Patterson claimed. Said they'd kill him if I didn't cooperate. Investigation revealed Patterson's son did owe money to cartel-connected bookmakers, but Patterson had been taking payments for 2 years, long before any threats. The second executive, Maria Santos at ConocoPhillips, had been more careful. She'd hidden her payments through a complex series of investments, but forensic accounting revealed the truth. Santos attempted to flee when agents arrived at her home, confirming her guilt. In her home office, they found evidence of her real role. She was coordinating the inside men across multiple companies, essentially running the corporate espionage arm of the operation. The third name led to the most shocking discovery. David Reynolds wasn't just any executive. He was a senior vice president at Exxon, Lester's former employer. "I know Reynolds," Lester told the team. "He was my mentor when I started." This doesn't make sense, but the evidence was clear. Reynolds had been feeding information to the cartels about security procedures, inspection schedules, even helping them identify vulnerable workers to recruit. Confronting Reynolds was personal for Lester. They'd worked together for 5 years, and Reynolds had written the recommendation letter for Lester's FBI application. "Why, David?" Lester asked during the interrogation. Reynolds looked older than his 60 years, defeated. "Retirement was coming, and I had nothing saved. 2 divorces, bad investments. They offered me enough to disappear, start over. I took it. With the corporate conspirators arrested, the full scope became clear. This wasn't random theft. It was systematic industrial espionage combined with organized crime." Howard Brooks, a financial analyst brought in to assess the damage, calculated the total loss. Over 5 years, they've stolen approximately $800 million in oil. But the environmental damage, the market manipulation, the corruption, the real cost is in the billions. The simultaneous raids of Operation Black Gold yielded impressive results. 43 illegal drilling sites shut down, 287 arrests, and the recovery of stolen oil worth $200 million. But there were casualties. At one site in New Mexico, workers resisted arrest. A shootout left 2 cartel gunmen dead and 3 FBI agents wounded. The workers caught in the middle, desperate men who thought they were just taking oil field jobs, were traumatized. Chester led the team processing these workers. Most are victims, brought here illegally, told they'd be killed if they left, paid just enough to survive. They're not criminals, they're slaves. Immigration officials agreed to special visas for workers who testified against the cartels. It was a controversial decision, but necessary to get cooperation. Among the workers, they found Thomas Mitchell, an American geologist who'd been reported missing 2 years earlier. His family had held a funeral, believing him dead. "I wanted to leave," Mitchell said, tears streaming down his face. "But they said they'd already told my family I was dead, that if I appeared, they'd kill them to keep the secret. I believed them." Reuniting Mitchell with his family became a media sensation, putting a human face on the conspiracy. His wife's joy at learning he was alive, his children's confusion and anger, the complexity of rebuilding a life after 2 years. It all played out publicly. Whitmore, facing life in prison, decided to cooperate fully. His testimony revealed the cartel's future plans. They intended to move beyond theft to controlling entire oil fields, using shell companies and corruption to take over legitimate operations. "Oil is the new cocaine," Whitmore said. "Legal to possess, essential to the economy, and incredibly profitable. The cartels see it as their future." His information led to arrests in Mexico, including 2 high-ranking cartel leaders who'd been overseeing the oil operations. The Mexican government, embarrassed by the revelation of how deeply the cartels had penetrated the oil industry, launched their own investigation. Melvin worked with Congress on new legislation. "We need stricter monitoring of drilling operations, mandatory reporting of inventory discrepancies, and severe penalties for companies that cover up theft." The Oil Field Security Act of 1992 passed with bipartisan support, implementing many of his recommendations. Satellite monitoring of drilling sites became standard, and a joint task force between FBI and industry was established. But everyone knew this was just the beginning. The cartels had shown they could adapt, moving from drugs to oil. They'd likely adapt again. Stanley's analysis of seized computers revealed the next evolution: cybercrime. The cartels were investing in hackers, planning to steal oil through digital manipulation rather than physical drilling. "They're learning," Stanley warned. "Physical theft is risky, but if they can alter digital records, redirect shipments through computer systems, they can steal without ever touching a drill." this led to a new focus on cybersecurity in the oil industry. Companies that had resisted modernization, still using paper records and manual processes, suddenly saw the wisdom in older methods. The trials of the conspirators took 2 years. Whitmore was convicted on all counts, sentenced to life without parole. His testimony helped convict dozens of others, though he showed no remorse. "I was a businessman," he said at sentencing. "Supply and demand. The system is corrupt. I just played by its real rules." The corporate executives received lighter sentences, 10 to 15 years, but the damage to their companies' reputations was severe. Exxon's stock dropped 12% when Reynolds' involvement became public. The workers faced varied fates. Those who cooperated received probation or light sentences. Rick Jameson served 6 months, then returned to the oil fields. His reputation damaged, but his skills still valuable. "I made a mistake," Jameson said in an interview. "Desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. But I paid my price, and now I want to rebuild." Some workers couldn't readjust. The trauma of their involvement, the fear of cartel retaliation, the shame of their choices. It was too much. Support groups formed, oil field workers helping each other process what they'd been through. The environmental cleanup took years and cost hundreds of millions. Some areas were permanently damaged, aquifers contaminated, land poisoned. Ranchers sued, communities demanded compensation. Norman Walsh left law enforcement to start a consulting firm helping oil companies improve security. "The threat isn't going away," he'd tell clients. "The cartels see oil as easier than drugs. We need to be prepared." Virgil Thompson wrote a book about the investigation, focusing on how local knowledge and community connections were crucial to solving the case. It became required reading at the FBI Academy. Chester Rodriguez received a commendation and promotion, but the case had changed him. "We saved lives, stopped a massive criminal operation, but we also saw how desperation drives good people to bad choices. The real crime is the system that creates such desperation." 5 years after Operation Black Gold, Lester McGraw stood at one of the former illegal drilling sites, now properly operated by a legitimate company. The desert looked the same, harsh, unforgiving, beautiful in its desolation. He thought about the men who disappeared into this wasteland, driven by debt and despair to crime. Some were dead, others in prison, a few rebuilt their lives. All were marked by their experience. The cartels had moved on to other schemes. Cyber theft, as Stanley predicted, but also human trafficking, using the same routes they'd established for moving workers to move other desperate people. The oil industry had learned lessons, implementing security measures that made large-scale physical theft harder. But everyone knew it was an arms race. Criminals innovating, law enforcement responding, innocent people caught in between. Lester's phone rang. Another case, another conspiracy, another group of desperate people making bad choices. He looked one last time at the pump jacks nodding in the distance, extracting wealth from ancient deposits, and thought about how that wealth attracted predators like blood in water. The Permian Basin continued to produce oil, continued to attract workers seeking fortune, continued to hide secrets in its vast expanse. The conspiracy had been stopped, the criminals punished, the systems reformed. But the fundamental dynamics remained: valuable resources, desperate people, and those willing to exploit both. As he drove away, Lester knew the real lesson of Operation Black Gold wasn't about oil or cartels or corruption. It was about the choices people make when pushed to extremes, and how thin the line between lawful and criminal could become when survival was at stake. 1 year after Operation Black Gold, Lester McGraw was called back to Texas from his new post in Washington. The oil field conspiracy they thought they'd dismantled was showing signs of resurrection, but with a disturbing new dimension. The call came from Chester Rodriguez, now leading the FBI's Oil Crimes Task Force. "Lester, we've got workers disappearing again. Same pattern, same areas, but something's different. These aren't desperate men taking illegal jobs. These are established workers vanishing from legitimate sites." Lester arrived in Midland to find a changed landscape. Security at oil facilities had increased dramatically since Operation Black Gold. Cameras, fences, regular patrols. Yet workers were still vanishing. 12 in the past month, Chester explained, showing Lester the files. All experienced, well-paid, no financial troubles. They just disappeared during their shifts. The first case Chester detailed was Brad Morrison, a senior drilling supervisor for Apache Corporation. Left his post at 2 a.m. for a routine inspection. His hard hat and radio were found at the wellhead. No sign of him since. Melvin Hayes, still with the Railroad Commission, had noticed something else. Equipment is disappearing too. Not whole rigs, but specific components. Pressure valves, specialized drill bits, things you'd need for precision extraction. This wasn't the cartel's previous smash-and-grab approach. This was surgical, planned, professional. Stanley Cooper had been monitoring dark web communications. There's chatter about something called Project Depth. References to recruiting specialists for deep drilling. Promises of 5-year contracts worth millions. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos, the ConocoPhillips executive arrested during Black Gold, reached out from prison. She wanted to make a deal. "I know who's behind the new disappearances," she said when Lester interviewed her. "It's not the cartels this time, it's worse." According to Santos, before her arrest, she'd been approached by representatives of a Chinese state-owned energy company. They wanted insider information about American drilling techniques, particularly for extracting oil from previously unreachable deposits. "They're not stealing oil," Santos explained. "They're stealing knowledge." The missing workers are being recruited for a massive project in the South China Sea. International waters, no jurisdiction, unlimited funding. The implications were staggering. Industrial espionage on this scale was an act of economic warfare. Norman Walsh, now running his security firm, was brought in as a consultant. "If Santos is right, we're dealing with a foreign intelligence operation, not criminals. Different rules, different dangers. Verification came through intelligence channels. Satellite imagery of artificial islands in the South China Sea showed drilling platforms using distinctly American designs. The NSA intercepted communications mentioning American workers by name. But proving it and stopping it were different challenges. The workers were likely leaving voluntarily, lured by massive payoffs. Once in international waters, they were beyond U.S. law enforcement reach. Lester focused on finding the recruitment pipeline. If they couldn't stop workers from leaving, they could at least identify who was facilitating it. Surveillance on oil field bars, hotels, places where workers gathered, eventually paid off. Agents noticed certain individuals who appeared repeatedly, always engaging workers in conversation, always buying drinks, always asking about skills and experience. One recruiter, identifying himself as Tom Bradley, was followed to a high-end hotel in Houston. Electronic surveillance revealed he was actually Chen Wei, a Chinese intelligence officer operating under diplomatic cover. "We can't arrest him," Chester said frustratedly. "Diplomatic immunity. Best we can do is declare him persona non grata, send him home." But before Chen was expelled, they watched him carefully. He met with 3 American citizens who didn't have diplomatic protection. These were the real recruiters, the ones making contact with workers. The first was Jason Park, a former petroleum engineer who'd lost his license after a safety violation. The second was Michelle Torres, a HR specialist who'd worked for multiple oil companies. The third was Robert Kim, a Korean-American with ties to several Asian energy companies. The FBI moved on all three simultaneously. The arrests yielded computers, phones, and documents that revealed the full scope of the operation. They had files on over 300 workers, Stanley reported. Psychological profiles, financial status, family situations. They knew exactly who to target and how. The recruitment process was sophisticated. Workers were approached gradually, first with legitimate job offers from Asian companies. Once interested, they'd be told about special projects requiring discretion. Only after multiple meetings and background checks would the true nature be revealed. Working on disputed territory, helping foreign powers access technology America had spent decades developing. Among the seized documents was a list of the 12 missing workers. According to the records, they were all in Macau, undergoing orientation before deployment to the drilling platforms. Macau is Chinese territory, Chester pointed out. We can't just go get them. But Lester had an idea. They're American citizens. If we can prove they're being held against their will, State Department can intervene. The challenge was making contact. The workers were likely monitored, their communications controlled. Traditional methods wouldn't work. Ernest Valdez, who joined the task force after Black Gold, suggested using the workers' families. If family members traveled to Macau as tourists, tried to make contact, it might reveal whether they're free to leave. Brad Morrison's wife, Linda, volunteered immediately. I just want to know he's safe, she said. If he chose this, I need to hear it from him. The operation was delicate. Linda traveled to Macau with an undercover FBI agent posing as her sister. They checked into a casino hotel, acting like tourists while the agent established surveillance. On the third day, Brad Morrison appeared in the hotel lobby. He looked healthy but stressed, accompanied by two obvious minders. Linda approached him, and his reaction told everything: shock, fear, a desperate glance at his minders. I'm fine, he said loudly, just working on a project. I'll be home when it's done. But as he hugged his wife, he whispered, help me. That was enough. The State Department filed formal complaints, demanding access to American citizens. The Chinese government denied holding anyone, but international pressure mounted. Meanwhile, the arrested recruiters were being prosecuted. Jason Park broke first, agreeing to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. It started as legitimate recruitment, Park explained. Asian companies need expertise, willing to pay top dollar. But then it changed. They wanted specific knowledge. Fracking techniques, deep water drilling, horizontal drilling methods that took America decades to develop. And the workers who refused to share that knowledge? Lester asked. We're told their contracts were extended. Involuntary extensions, they called it. Basically, imprisonment until they cooperated. Michelle Torres provided details about the financial structure. Workers were promised $10 million for 5 years, but the contracts had clauses. If they left early, they owed $50 million in penalties. It was indentured servitude disguised as employment. Robert Kim revealed the technology transfer method. Workers would train Chinese, engineers, step by step, until they could replicate American techniques. The knowledge that took decades and billions to develop transferred in months. With this testimony, prosecutors built cases not just for kidnapping and human trafficking, but for espionage and theft of trade secrets. The charges were serious enough to trigger congressional hearings. Senator Patricia Williams, heading the investigation committee, was blunt. This isn't just about missing workers. This is about America's economic future. If our innovations can be stolen this easily, what incentive is there to innovate? The hearings revealed other industries facing similar threats. Tech workers disappearing to work for Chinese companies, pharmaceutical researchers vanishing with proprietary knowledge. The oil field conspiracy was part of a larger pattern. Pressure on China intensified. Trade sanctions were threatened. Diplomatic relations strained. Finally, a breakthrough. China agreed to allow International Red Cross access to the workers. The Red Cross confirmed what the FBI suspected. The 12 workers were being held in corporate housing in Macau, technically free but practically prisoners due to contract penalties and confiscated passports. Negotiations for their release took months. China demanded the U.S. drop charges against the recruiters. The U.S. refused. Finally, a compromise. The workers would be released, but China would admit no wrongdoing. The workers' return was bittersweet. They were free but traumatized, and potentially facing prosecution themselves for sharing classified industrial knowledge. Brad Morrison's debriefing was typical. They said it was just a job, good money, interesting work. By the time I realized what was really happening, I was trapped. They had my passport, said I owed millions if I left. Some workers had resisted more than others. Tom Franklin, a drilling specialist, had deliberately taught incorrect techniques, sabotaging the knowledge transfer. I gave them enough to seem cooperative, but not enough to actually work. Hope it cost them millions in failed drilling. Others had fully cooperated, either from fear or greed. These faced the harshest legal consequences, charged with economic espionage. The incident triggered major changes in the oil industry. Companies implemented new security protocols, including restrictions on foreign travel and mandatory reporting of job offers from certain countries. We're calling it the Morrison Protocol, Norman explained to a conference of security professionals. Any worker with critical knowledge has to notify their employer of foreign job offers. It's controversial, limits personal freedom, but necessary. The recruiters' trials were highly publicized. Jason Park was sentenced to 15 years, his testimony crucial in convicting the others. Michelle Torres received 12 years, Robert Kim 20. But everyone knew they were small players. The real organizers remained untouchable in China, probably planning their next operation. Stanley's ongoing monitoring revealed the evolution. They're not recruiting Americans anymore. They're targeting Europeans, Australians, anyone with advanced extraction knowledge. The game continues, just with different players. The returned workers struggled to reintegrate. Some oil companies wouldn't rehire them, considering them security risks. Others faced suspicion from colleagues who wondered what knowledge they'd shared. Brad Morrison eventually found work with a small independent operator. "I'm grateful to be home," he said in an interview, "but I'll never be the same." The experience of being trapped, of being forced to betray your country's interests, it changes you. Support groups formed, similar to those for the Black Gold survivors. Workers who'd been targeted by foreign recruitment shared experiences, warning signs, recovery strategies. Melvin worked on new regulations requiring disclosure of foreign ownership in oil companies operating in the U.S. If Chinese state companies want to drill here, fine, but they do it transparently, following our rules, not stealing our methods. The international implications continued for years. The incident was cited in trade negotiations, security agreements, discussions about protecting intellectual property. It became a case study in economic warfare. Lester, reflecting on both Operation Black Gold and Project Depth, saw a pattern. First, it was cartels stealing oil, then foreign powers stealing knowledge. What's next? The answer came sooner than expected. Cyber attacks on oil infrastructure increased, attempting to steal digital drilling data. Physical theft had evolved to knowledge theft, now evolving again to digital theft. Chester, still leading the oil crimes task force, expanded its focus. We're not just protecting oil anymore. We're protecting the knowledge, the technology, the competitive advantage that keeps America energy independent. The task force partnered with the NSA, CIA, and private security firms. Oil field security became a matter of national security, requiring resources and attention at the highest levels. 5 years after Project Depth, Lester attended a conference on energy security. Representatives from government, industry, and academia discussed protecting America's energy advantages. One speaker, a young engineer named Rebecca Chen, made a provocative point. We're so focused on protecting knowledge, we're not creating new knowledge. China forced us to innovate through competition. Maybe that's not entirely bad. It was controversial but thought-provoking. The theft of American techniques had forced rapid innovation, development of new methods that couldn't be easily stolen or replicated. It's an arms race, Rebecca continued. They steal, we innovate. They steal again, we innovate more. The cycle drives progress, even if it's painful. Lester thought about all the workers he'd encountered. Those who disappeared voluntarily for money, those trapped by circumstances, those who'd resisted, those who'd cooperated. Each had made choices based on personal situations, economic pressures, patriotic feelings, or simple survival. The oil fields of Texas continued to pump, continued to attract workers from around the world, continued to generate wealth and complications. The landscape was more secure now, more monitored, more regulated. But the fundamental tensions remained. America had resources others wanted, knowledge others needed, advantages others envied. Protecting those while remaining an open society, balancing security with freedom, preventing theft while encouraging innovation. These challenges would persist. As Lester retired from the FBI, he gave a final briefing to his successors. The oil field conspiracies taught us that energy security isn't just about protecting oil. It's about protecting people, knowledge, and innovation. The threats will evolve, but the principles remain: vigilance, adaptation, and remembering that behind every conspiracy are human beings making difficult choices. The Permian Basin, site of so much drama, looked peaceful in the sunset. But beneath the surface, oil continued to flow, wealth continued to generate, and somewhere, someone was planning the next scheme to capture that wealth. The cycle would continue: crime and law enforcement, innovation and theft, desperation and opportunity, all playing out in the harsh beauty of the Texas oil fields. The conspiracies had been stopped, the criminals punished, the system strengthened. But everyone knew it was just a pause, not an ending, in the eternal struggle for resources that drove both progress and conflict. 3 years after the Project Depth revelations, Lester McGraw was enjoying retirement in Austin when Chester Rodriguez called with news that pulled him back into the world he thought he'd left behind. They found Whitmore dead in his cell, Chester said. Official cause is suicide, but Lester, he left something behind. A confession that changes everything we thought we knew about both operations. Marcus Whitmore's death wasn't entirely surprising. Serving life without parole, facing constant threats from other inmates who saw him as a snitch, he'd attempted suicide twice before. But this time he'd succeeded, using a sharpened toothbrush to open his wrists in the middle of the night. What was surprising was the 40-page handwritten document found under his mattress, addressed to Lester specifically. "Agent McGraw," the letter began, "by the time you read this, I'll be dead." The truth needs to be told, not for redemption, I'm beyond that, but because the game isn't over. It never was. Whitmore's confession revealed that both Operation Black Gold and Project Depth were connected, part of a larger scheme orchestrated by a coalition of international oil speculators. "We called ourselves the Consortium," Whitmore wrote. "American oil thieves, Chinese intelligence, Russian oligarchs, Saudi princes operating outside their government's knowledge. We weren't competing. We were cooperating, creating chaos to manipulate oil prices." According to Whitmore, every barrel stolen, every worker recruited, every piece of knowledge transferred was designed to create instability in oil markets. When supplies were disrupted, prices spiked. When technology was stolen, development costs increased. The consortium made billions betting on these fluctuations. "The cartels thought they were in charge," Whitmore continued. "The Chinese thought they were stealing secrets. But we were playing them all, using their operations as cover for market manipulation." Stanley Cooper verified what he could through financial forensics. There were unusual trading patterns during both operations. Massive short positions before raids, long positions before supply disruptions. Someone was definitely profiting from inside knowledge. The confession named names. Some expected, others shocking. David Reynolds, the Exxon executive, hadn't just been feeding information to cartels. He'd been one of the consortium's founding members, using his position to identify vulnerable operations and workers. More disturbing was the revelation that the consortium had placed agents throughout the oil industry and government regulatory agencies. People who'd helped with the investigations might have been secretly working for the enemy. "Trust no one," Whitmore had written. "The consortium has members you'd never suspect. Judges, senators, even FBI agents. The oil industry is a game worth trillions, and everyone has a price." Chester assembled a small, trusted team to investigate Whitmore's claims. They couldn't involve the full task force. If Whitmore was right, some members might be compromised. The team included Lester, Stanley, Norman Walsh, and 2 new agents Chester had personally vetted. They worked from a secure location, avoiding normal FBI channels. Their first priority was identifying the consortium's financial structure. Stanley traced shell companies mentioned in Whitmore's confession, finding a web of transactions spanning 50 countries. "The money moves like water," Stanley explained. "Offshore accounts, cryptocurrency, gold transfers. But there's a pattern. Everything eventually flows through 3 banks, one in Switzerland, one in Singapore, one in Cyprus." Norman used his security contacts to investigate personnel Whitmore had named. Several people who left the oil industry after Black Gold started new lives with unexplained wealth. Houses paid in cash, children in expensive schools, lifestyles that don't match their official incomes. One name stood out: Patricia Wells, former regulator with the Texas Railroad Commission. She'd been helpful during Operation Black Gold, providing crucial information about illegal drilling sites. According to Whitmore, she'd been feeding the consortium information about investigations for years. Surveillance on Wells revealed she was still active. Despite being officially retired, she met regularly with oil executives, foreign businessmen, and individuals with no legitimate reason to know her. "She's still coordinating something," Chester observed. "But what?" The answer came through intercepted communications. The consortium was planning something they called Final Strike, a coordinated attack on oil infrastructure designed to create a supply crisis and drive prices to record levels. "They're going to sabotage refineries," Stanley decoded from encrypted messages. "Make it look like accidents or terrorist attacks. The chaos would last months, prices would triple. The plan was scheduled for the anniversary of Whitmore's death." He'd apparently insisted on it as a final gesture of defiance. They had 6 weeks to stop it, but stopping it legally would be nearly impossible. The consortium had learned from previous operations. Everything was compartmentalized, communications were encrypted, and players were spread across multiple jurisdictions. Lester proposed a different approach. We turn them against each other. The consortium works because members trust each other. Break that trust, and they'll destroy themselves. Using Whitmore's confession as a blueprint, they began feeding false information through channels the consortium monitored. Fake FBI reports suggesting certain members were cooperating. Altered financial records showing embezzlement within the consortium. Manufactured evidence that the Chinese were planning to betray their partners. The paranoia took hold quickly. Consortium members began questioning each other, moving money defensively, canceling meetings. The first crack appeared when a Russian oligarch, fearing betrayal, withdrew his funds suddenly, triggering a cascade of similar moves. Patricia Wells, watching her network collapse, made a fatal mistake. She called an emergency meeting at a ranch outside Houston, bringing together American members of the consortium. The FBI was ready. The ranch was surrounded, communications jammed, every entrance covered. When Wells and 12 conspirators were inside, the arrests began. Wells tried to maintain innocence, but faced with Whitmore's detailed confession and financial evidence, her lawyers advised cooperation. Her testimony revealed the consortium's full scope. It started in the 1980s, Wells explained. Oil prices were volatile, companies were struggling. A group of us realized that we could profit from chaos rather than stability. Create the crisis, bet on the outcome, everybody wins except the public. She named over 40 members worldwide, including government officials in 7 countries. The revelations triggered investigations globally, though many conspirators were beyond reach in countries without extradition treaties. The planned refinery attacks were prevented, though 3 conspirators not at the ranch. Meeting attempted to proceed independently. Alert security stopped too. The third managed to cause a small fire at a Louisiana refinery before being arrested. Trials of the American conspirators took 2 years. Wells was sentenced to 25 years. Others received sentences ranging from 10 years to life. But the real victory was disrupting the consortium's network. International cooperation led to arrests in Europe and Asia. Swiss banks froze accounts. Singapore prosecuted financial crimes. Even China arrested some members to save face after the Project Depth embarrassment. But the investigation also revealed uncomfortable truths about the oil industry's vulnerability. The same global interconnections that enabled commerce also enabled conspiracy. The same deregulation that promoted competition also created opportunities for manipulation. Melvin Hayes, still with the Railroad Commission, led efforts to reform oversight. We need international standards, shared databases, real-time monitoring of suspicious activities. The industry has to accept that transparency is the price of security. Some companies resisted, claiming competitive disadvantages. Others embraced reform, recognizing that stability benefited everyone long-term. The debate continued for years, with incremental progress. The human cost of the consortium's activities became clear through victim impact statements. Families of workers who died, communities poisoned by illegal drilling, investors who'd lost savings to manipulated prices. The damage was immeasurable. Rick Jameson, the worker whose daughter's medical bills had driven him to crime, testified about the exploitation. They knew exactly how desperate we were. They used our love for our families against us. We weren't criminals. We were victims who became criminals to survive. A compensation fund was established using seized consortium assets, though it could never fully repair the damage. priority went to families of dead workers and communities with environmental damage. Lester was called to testify before Congress about lessons learned. The consortium showed us that crime has evolved. It's not about stealing oil anymore. It's about manipulating entire markets. We need to evolve, too. His recommendations included creating an international energy crimes unit, mandatory reporting of market anomalies, and protection programs for whistleblowers. Some were implemented, others stalled in political gridlock. Chester, promoted to assistant director, expanded the Oil Crimes Task Force into the Energy Security Division. We're not just protecting oil, we're protecting natural gas, electricity grids, renewable energy infrastructure. Everything that powers our society is a potential target. Stanley developed AI systems to detect market manipulation patterns. The consortium operated for decades because no one was looking for connections. Now, we have systems that can spot coordinated trading across multiple markets in real time. Norman's security firm grew into a major contractor, protecting energy infrastructure worldwide. Physical security is just the start. We need financial security, cybersecurity, personnel security. It's all connected. But even as defenses strengthened, new threats emerged. Cryptocurrency enabled anonymous transactions. Cyber attacks could manipulate data without physical presence. Renewable energy infrastructure presented new vulnerabilities. Ernest Valdez, who'd worked both black gold and depth, now trained new agents. Every generation thinks they've solved the problem. But criminals adapt. The consortium is gone, but something else will take its place. His prediction proved accurate. Within 5 years, investigators uncovered the network, a loose affiliation of hackers, traders, and insiders manipulating energy markets through cyber attacks and data theft. The difference was the response. Systems developed after the consortium detected the network early. International cooperation, established through painful experience, enabled rapid action. The new conspiracy was disrupted before major damage occurred. Lester, in his 70s now, wrote a book about the oil field conspiracies. Energy is power, he wrote, not just electrical but political, economic, social. Those who control energy control society. That's why protecting it requires constant vigilance. The book became required reading in security studies programs. But Lester worried it might also serve as inspiration for future conspirators. Every time we reveal how a crime was committed, we teach criminals what not to do next time. The Permian Basin, center of so much conspiracy, had changed dramatically. Advanced monitoring systems tracked every barrel extracted. Workers underwent background checks and psychological evaluations. International observers ensured transparency. Yet oil still flowed, fortunes were still made and lost, and human nature remained unchanged. Greed, desperation, and ambition still drove people to crime. The difference was the response: faster, coordinated, effective. On the 10th anniversary of Whitmore's death, a memorial was held for victims of the oil conspiracies. Families of dead workers, reformed criminals who'd served their time, investigators who'd dedicated years to the cases, all gathered in Midland. Rick Jameson, now a counselor for distressed oil workers, spoke. We can't undo the past, but we can learn from it. When good people are desperate, bad people exploit them. Our job is to create systems where desperation doesn't drive people to crime. Patricia Wells, serving her sentence, sent a statement read by her lawyer. I rationalized my crimes as victimless, just numbers on screens. But those numbers represented real people, real suffering. I hope my cooperation helps prevent future conspiracies. The Chinese government, in a rare acknowledgement, admitted Project Depth had been misguided and announce new policies respecting intellectual property. Though everyone knew espionage continued, the public admission marked progress. The cartels, weakened by loss of oil revenue, shifted to other crimes. But lessons learned during Black Gold helped law enforcement track and disrupt their new operations. Chester, now director of the Energy Security Division, reflected on the journey. We started investigating missing workers. We ended up uncovering global conspiracies, market manipulation, international espionage. Each layer revealed another, like geological strata hiding oil. Technology continued advancing. Horizontal drilling, fracking, deep water extraction. American innovations that the consortium had tried to steal were soon superseded by newer techniques. The cycle of innovation and theft continued, but with better safeguards. Environmental concerns added complexity. As the world shifted toward renewable energy, oil's value fluctuated wildly. Some predicted this volatility would spawn new conspiracies. Others hoped decreased dependence would reduce oil's criminal appeal. Lester, in his final interview before passing away at 81, was philosophical. We stopped the consortium, but we didn't stop human nature. As long as resources have value, people will scheme to control them. The best we can do is make crime harder than honest work. His funeral was attended by hundreds, agents he'd trained, workers he'd saved, even some reformed criminals he'd arrested. Chester delivered the eulogy. Lester McGraw showed us that fighting energy crime isn't just about protecting resources. It's about protecting people from exploitation, from desperation, from those who would use both for profit. His legacy isn't just the conspiracies he stopped, but the systems he built to prevent future ones. The FBI's Energy Security Division, built on foundations Lester helped establish, continued growing. International partnerships strengthened. Technology improved. Oversight increased. But in the Permian Basin, as pump jacks nodded under the endless Texas sky, everyone knew the game continued. Oil flowed, money moved, and somewhere, someone was planning the next scheme. The difference was readiness. The naivety that enabled Operation Black Gold was gone. The isolation that allowed Project Depth had ended. The market manipulation of the consortium was now monitored. Yet vigilance required constant renewal. Each generation of investigators had to learn these lessons, adapt to new threats, protect against evolving schemes. The oil field conspiracies weren't history. They were preparation for whatever came next. As Chester stood at Lester's grave, overlooking the Texas plains where so much had happened, he thought about cycles, geological epochs creating oil, human generations extracting it, criminal enterprises stealing it, law enforcement stopping them. All cycles, all temporary, all part of humanity's complex relationship with the resources that powered civilization. The conspiracies had been stopped, justice served, systems reformed. But the story continued, would always continue, as long as energy had value and humans had ambition. The Permian Basin would keep producing oil until wells ran dry, or the world moved beyond fossil fuels. And as long as it did, the FBI would watch, guard, and investigate, protecting not just resources but the people whose lives and livelihoods depended on them. The oil field conspiracy was over. The next conspiracy was already beginning, and somewhere a young agent was preparing to stop it, trained by those who'd stopped the last one, equipped with tools forged from hard experience, ready to face whatever emerged from the endless cycle of crime and justice in America's oil fields. The call came in at 2:17 a.m. on a humid September night in 1993. Special Agent Clifford Nash was yanked from sleep by the harsh ring of his bedside phone in his San Antonio apartment. 20 years with the FBI had trained him to go from deep sleep to full alertness in seconds. "Nash," he answered, already reaching for the lamp. "Clifford, this is Director Williams. We have a Code 7 situation at the border. 3 of our agents have been missing for 72 hours. Code 7 meant agents in extreme danger, possibly dead." Clifford was already pulling on his clothes. "Which agents?" "The Martinez investigation team. Agents David Reeves, Jennifer Cole, and Michael Torres. They were investigating cartel tunnels near Eagle Pass when they disappeared. No ransom demands? Nothing. Complete silence. But Clifford, there's something else. This is the 4th team to disappear in that sector in 2 years. The previous cases were classified, different operations, but same area, same complete vanishing. The drive from San Antonio to Eagle Pass took 2 hours in normal conditions, but Clifford made it in 90 minutes. The Eagle Pass FBI field office was a modest building that normally housed only 5 agents. Tonight it was swarming with activity. Gilbert Morrison, the lead investigator from the Austin office, met Clifford at the entrance. "Thank God you're here. I've been with the Bureau 15 years, and this situation is beyond anything I've seen." "What do we know?" Gilbert led him to a secure room where several agents were studying maps and surveillance photos. Reeves, Cole, and Torres were investigating a suspected tunnel complex used by the Martinez cartel for human trafficking. They went in with full tactical gear, GPS trackers, constant radio contact. At 11:47 p.m. 3 nights ago, all communication ceased simultaneously. Equipment failure? That's what we thought. But their vehicle was found at the entry point, no signs of struggle. Their initial equipment markers show they entered the tunnel system, moved about 200 yards. Then all signals stopped. Oscar Hoffman, a junior agent fresh from Quantico, pulled up satellite imagery. The tunnel entrance they used is here, but thermal imaging shows the tunnel system is far more extensive than we knew. It's not just smuggling routes, it's a whole underground network. Albert Reeds, the tactical team leader, entered with a grim expression. "We sent in a drone this morning. The tunnel's been sealed from the inside, professionally, with concrete. Someone didn't want us following." Clifford studied the maps. Eagle Pass sat on the Rio Grande, directly across from Piedras Negras, Mexico. The area had been a smuggling route for over a century, but the sophistication of these tunnels suggested something more than normal cartel operations. "What were they specifically investigating?" Clifford asked. "Missing persons," Gilbert replied. "Over the past year, 43 people have vanished from the Eagle Pass area. Not typical border crossers, American citizens, legal residents, people with no reason to disappear." Leonard Pike, a surveillance specialist, added disturbing details. The missing persons fit a pattern. All between 25 and 40, all with specific skills. Medical training, engineering, former military. Someone's collecting people with expertise. Ernest Valdez, who had family on both sides of the border, provided local intelligence. My cousin in Piedras Negras says there are rumors about los desaparecidos, the disappeared ones. People taken underground who never come back. The cartels supposedly sell them to someone called El Arquitecto, the architect. Human trafficking? Different. Regular trafficking, people pay to cross, or they're moved for labor. These people are taken against their will and never surface in any market. They just vanish. Clifford assembled a team to enter the tunnels from a different entrance, one discovered through ground-penetrating radar. But they needed intelligence first. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Gonzalez, a woman who'd escaped from cartel captivity 2 weeks earlier, was in protective custody. She'd been too traumatized to speak initially, but hearing about the missing agents motivated her to talk. "I was in the tunnels for 6 months," she said, her voice shaking. "But not the smuggling tunnels everyone knows about. There are deeper levels, older tunnels. Some say they're from Prohibition, others say they're older than that." "What did you see down there?" "People working. Americans, Mexicans, Chinese, all kinds. They're building something, expanding the tunnels, installing equipment. Guards everywhere, but not regular cartel soldiers. These were professionals, military trained." "Building what?" Maria's eyes darted nervously. "I don't know exactly, but I heard them talk about the facility. Medical equipment, computers, things that don't belong in smuggling tunnels, and the people they bring down, the ones with skills, they never leave. They're told they're working off debts, but the debts never end." This painted a different picture. Not just tunnels, but an underground complex, possibly a hidden facility for illegal operations, drug manufacturing, weapons storage, or worse. Oscar had been analyzing financial records. Large amounts of money have been moving through Eagle Pass banks, then disappearing. Shell companies buying construction equipment, medical supplies, industrial generators. Someone's building infrastructure down there. The decision was made to mount a major operation, but they needed to find their missing agents first. If they were alive, they were likely in this deeper complex Maria described. Gilbert coordinated with Mexican authorities, but trust was limited. Corruption in local police was endemic. The cartels often knew about operations before they happened. "We go in with a small team," Clifford decided. "Find our agents, gather intelligence, then call in the cavalry." The team consisted of Clifford, Gilbert, Oscar, Albert, Leonard, and Ernest. They entered through an abandoned warehouse on the American side, where ground radar had detected tunnel access. The entrance was hidden beneath industrial equipment that hadn't been moved in years, except the dust patterns showed recent disturbance. A metal hatch, professionally installed, led down into darkness. The descent was worse than expected. The tunnel started crude, hand-dug, but quickly became sophisticated, concrete-lined, electric lighting, ventilation systems. This wasn't cartel work. This was professional engineering. They moved carefully, weapons drawn, night vision ready. The tunnel branched multiple times, a maze designed to confuse intruders. But Leonard's equipment detected heat signatures ahead. Multiple people, stationary. They found the first chamber after 20 minutes of careful advancement. Through a ventilation grate, they observed a shocking scene. Dozens of people in a workshop, assembling electronic equipment under armed supervision. "IEDs," Albert whispered. "They're making improvised explosive devices." But Oscar noticed something else. Those aren't just IEDs. Look at the complexity. Those are sophisticated trigger mechanisms, the kind used in military operations. They documented everything with cameras, then moved deeper. The next chamber was even more disturbing. A medical facility where people in surgical gear were operating on unconscious patients. Ernest, who had medical training, observed closely. They're not treating injuries. Those look like implant procedures. They're putting something inside these people. The implications were terrifying. An underground facility for human experimentation, forced labor, and weapons manufacturing, all hidden beneath the border. They found evidence of their missing agents in the third chamber. Personal effects in a storage room. Reeves' FBI badge, Cole's weapon, Torres' tactical vest, but no sign of the agents themselves. Moving deeper still, they discovered the heart of the operation, a massive underground space carved from rock containing what looked like a command center. Computer servers, communication equipment, maps covering walls showing tunnel networks extending across the entire border region. And standing in the center directing operations was a man Clifford recognized from intelligence briefings. Colonel Viktor Kozlov, formerly of the Russian Spetsnaz, wanted for war crimes in Chechnya. He'd disappeared 5 years ago, supposedly dead. El Arquitecto, Ernest whispered. He's not Mexican. He's Russian. The pieces fell together. This wasn't a cartel operation. It was foreign intelligence using cartel infrastructure. The missing people with specific skills, the sophisticated equipment, the medical procedures. They were building a hidden military facility on the U.S.-Mexico border. But before they could process this revelation, alarms began blaring. They'd been detected. "Move," Clifford ordered. They ran back through the tunnels as armed guards flooded in behind them. The sophisticated maze that had hidden the facility now worked against them, every turn potentially leading to a dead end or ambush. Leonard's equipment saved them, detecting heat signatures of approaching enemies and finding alternate routes. But they were being herded, directed away from the exit they'd entered. They emerged into another large chamber, and Clifford's heart sank. Their 3 missing agents were there, Reeves, Cole, and Torres, but they were changed. They stood at attention, weapons drawn, pointing at the rescue team. "Stand down!" Clifford shouted. "Reeves, Cole, Torres, it's us!" But Jennifer Cole's response was mechanical, emotionless. "You are trespassing in a restricted area. Surrender or be eliminated." "They've been programmed," Oscar said, horrified. "Whatever medical procedures they're doing, they're using mind control. The situation was impossible. They couldn't shoot fellow agents, but those agents were prepared to shoot them. And behind them, more guards were approaching. That's when Ernest noticed something, a pattern in the way the turned agents were standing, their positions. "They're leaving us an escape route," he whispered. "Look, they're all positioned to our left. The right tunnel is clear." "It's a trap," Albert argued. "No," Ernest insisted. "Look at Cole's eyes. She's fighting it. She's trying to help us." With no better option, they took the right tunnel. It led upward, toward the surface, but also toward the Mexican side of the border. They were being allowed to escape, but into Mexico, where they'd have no jurisdiction, no backup. They emerged in a warehouse in Piedras Negras, surrounded by Mexican federal police who'd obviously been waiting for them. "Senor Nash," the lead officer said in accented English, "you and your team will come with us." They were disarmed and taken to a police station that was clearly above their captor's pay grade. Modern, clean, efficient. They were placed in a conference room, not cells, and offered coffee and food. After an hour, a man in an expensive suit entered. "Agent Nash, I am Attorney General Roberto Mendez of the Mexican federal government. We need to talk about what you've discovered. Our agents are alive but compromised. We know about the facility. We've been monitoring it for 2 years." "And you've done nothing?" Mendez's expression was pained. "It's not that simple. The facility has hostages from 12 countries. Any direct action could result in massive casualties. Plus, Colonel Kozlov has fail-safes, explosives that would destroy evidence and kill everyone inside if the facility is raided. So, you just let him operate? We gather intelligence. We identify victims. We wait for an opportunity. Your agent's disappearance has created that opportunity. Kozlov thinks he's won, converting FBI agents to his cause. He's getting overconfident, making mistakes." Gilbert leaned forward. "You want us to work together. I want to save lives, including your agents. Kozlov's operation goes beyond what you've seen. He's selling programmed operatives to the highest bidder, assassins who can't be traced, saboteurs who don't know they're saboteurs until activated. The scope was staggering. A former Russian intelligence officer had created a human programming facility hidden beneath the U.S.-Mexico border, using cartel tunnels as cover, converting kidnapped specialists into programmable weapons. "How do we get our agents back?" Clifford asked. "The programming isn't perfect," Mendez explained. "It degrades over time without reinforcement. If we can extract them and deprogram them, they can recover. But extraction will be dangerous." Oscar had been working on his laptop, analyzing the photos they'd taken. "The computer systems I saw, they're networked. If we can access them, we might be able to disrupt the programming remotely." "That's possible," Mendez agreed. "We have someone inside, a deep cover operative who's been working in the facility for 6 months. They can provide access." The plan that emerged was complex and dangerous. The Mexican operative would create a system failure, forcing evacuations of certain sections. During the chaos, a joint U.S.-Mexico team would extract the 3 FBI agents and as many other victims as possible. But Kozlov wasn't stupid. He'd have contingencies, ways to eliminate evidence and witnesses if threatened. They'd have one chance, and failure would mean the deaths of dozens of innocent people. Leonard worked with Mexican technicians to develop a signal that would disrupt the programming frequencies they'd detected. It wouldn't free the victims completely, but might give them moments of clarity, chances to resist or escape. Ernest coordinated with medical teams on both sides of the border. The victims would need immediate treatment, both for whatever had been implanted in them and for the psychological trauma of mental programming. As dawn approached, they prepared for the operation. Clifford looked at his team, exhausted, frightened, but determined. They'd entered the tunnels looking for 3 missing agents. They'd discovered an international conspiracy that threatened the security of multiple nations. "Whatever happens down there," Clifford said, "our priority is getting our people out. Reeves, Cole, and Torres are victims, not enemies. We bring them home." The operation began at 3 a.m., time to exploit the facility's shift change when security would be momentarily disrupted. Clifford and his team waited in the Mexican police station, monitoring communications while joint Mexican-American tactical units positioned themselves at multiple tunnel entrances. The inside operative, identified only as Aguila, Eagle, initiated the first phase by introducing a virus into the facility's computer system. Within minutes, alarms began blaring, underground, and emergency evacuation protocols activated in non-essential sections. "Movement detected," Leonard reported, watching thermal imaging from a drone overhead. "Multiple heat signatures emerging from concealed exits we hadn't identified." People were fleeing the underground facility through hidden exits scattered across a 2-mile area. Mexican and American forces moved to intercept, but their priority remained the programmed agents and other victims. Oscar monitored intercepted communications from the facility. Kozlov's ordering all assets to the secure bunker. "That's where they'll take our agents." The secure bunker was the most fortified part of the facility, designed to withstand assault. But Aguila had provided its location and a crucial weakness: the ventilation system that could be used to introduce Leonard's disruption signal. Albert led the tactical team through a service tunnel while the main assault distracted Kozlov's forces. They moved quickly but carefully, aware that one wrong turn could lead to ambush or worse, triggering the explosives Kozlov had planted throughout the complex. They reached the ventilation access just as chaos erupted in the main facility. Mexican special forces had breached the primary entrance, drawing Kozlov's security forces into a firefight. "Deploying the signal now," Leonard announced, attaching his device to the ventilation system. The electromagnetic pulse was designed to interfere with whatever technology was being used to control the programmed victims. The effect was immediate. Through the security cameras Aguila had given them access to, they could see people in the secure bunker suddenly stopping, confusion replacing their mechanical movements. Some collapsed, others stood frozen, and a few seemed to regain awareness of their surroundings. "Move in now," Clifford ordered. They breached the bunker's emergency exit, finding a scene of chaos. Dozens of people in various states of consciousness, some clearly fighting against mental programming, others completely disoriented. Clifford spotted their agents immediately. Jennifer Cole was on her knees, holding her head, tears streaming down her face. David Reeves was standing against a wall, his body trembling as he fought against conflicting mental commands. Michael Torres had collapsed completely, unconscious but breathing. "Medical team, we need immediate extraction for 3 agents," Gilbert called over the radio. But their window was closing. Kozlov's voice echoed through the facility's speakers. "Initiate Protocol 7. All assets are compromised. Cleanse and retreat." "He's going to destroy the facility," Ernest realized. "We need to get everyone out now." The evacuation became desperate. Clifford and Albert carried Torres while Gilbert helped Cole, who was semi-conscious but unable to walk steadily. Reeves, showing remarkable willpower, managed to move on his own, though clearly struggling. Other victims were being helped by Mexican forces, but there were too many. The facility held over 60 programmed individuals, and they had minutes before Kozlov's failsafes activated. That's when Aguila revealed himself. A Mexican federal police captain named Miguel Santos, who'd been undercover for 18 months. "The explosives are on a timer," he said urgently. 15 minutes from activation, but I know which sections will blow first. We can create an evacuation route that avoids the blast zones. Following Santos's guidance, they formed a human chain, passing victims from the depths of the facility to the surface. Clifford was struck by the diversity of the victims. Americans, Mexicans, but also Europeans, Asians, people from across the globe. Kozlov had been operating an international kidnapping and programming ring. With 5 minutes remaining, they had evacuated 43 victims. But 17 remained in the deepest section, too damaged by programming to move themselves. "We can't reach them in time," Santos said grimly. Jennifer Cole, despite her condition, grabbed Clifford's arm. "The override," she whispered hoarsely. "Kozlov has a master override for the explosives. It's in his command center." Albert and 2 Mexican Special Forces operators sprinted back into the facility while everyone else continued evacuating. They had 3 minutes to find the override and disable it. Through the radio communications, they could hear the firefight in the command center. Kozlov and his remaining guards were making a last stand, trying to hold the position long enough for the explosives to detonate. 2 minutes, Leonard announced, his equipment tracking the explosive timers. Then Albert's voice. "Found it. But it's encrypted. Oscar, I need you to talk me through this." Oscar, despite the chaos around him, calmly guided Albert through bypassing the encryption. With 30 seconds remaining, Albert announced, "Explosives disabled." But Kozlov's escaping through a private tunnel. The relief was temporary. While the main threat was neutralized, Kozlov's escape meant the mastermind remained free. But they'd saved 60 lives and prevented a massacre. The surface looked like a battlefield. Emergency vehicles from both sides of the border, helicopters overhead, media already gathering at the perimeter. The rescued victims were being triaged, sorted by medical necessity and security risk. Clifford found their 3 agents being treated by FBI medical personnel. Jennifer Cole was conscious and coherent, though exhausted. David Reeves was fighting the medical team, still partially under programming influence. Michael Torres remained unconscious but stable. "Jennifer, can you tell me what happened down there?" Clifford asked gently. Cole's voice was weak but determined. "They grabbed us in the tunnel. Gas, I think. Woke up in a medical room. They did something to our heads, implants, drugs, I don't know." Then the programming session started. Programming, videos, audio, electrical stimulation. They were rewriting our thoughts, making us believe we were working for them voluntarily. After a while, you can't tell what's real anymore. Your own thoughts feel foreign. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a specialist in deprogramming cult victims, had been brought in to assess the situation. What they've done is a combination of techniques, drugs to make the mind malleable, repetitive conditioning to implant behaviors, and possibly surgical implants to reinforce compliance. It's recoverable, but it will take time. The true scope of Kozlov's operation became clear as investigators processed the facility. They found detailed records of every victim, where they were taken from, what skills they possessed, and most disturbingly, who they'd been sold to. He was creating custom operatives, Oscar explained, reviewing the digital records they'd recovered. A client wants an assassin who speaks Mandarin and has medical training. Kozlov would kidnap someone with those skills and program them. Need a saboteur with engineering expertise? Same process. The client list was explosive. Criminal organizations, terrorist groups, even some names that suggested government agencies from various countries. This wasn't just crime. It was an international intelligence crisis. Attorney General Mendez coordinated with American authorities to handle the political implications. This needs to be handled carefully. Some of these victims were sold to powerful people. If we're not careful, they could be killed to prevent them from testifying. All 60 rescued victims were placed in protective custody, split between American and Mexican facilities. But deprogramming them would be a massive undertaking. Each had been subjected to different levels of conditioning, some for days, others for months. Jennifer Cole's recovery was fastest, perhaps due to her FBI training and resisting interrogation. Within a week, she could provide detailed testimony about the facility's operations. Kozlov had doctors, psychologists, former intelligence officers from various countries, she explained. They were perfecting mind control techniques, combining old Soviet methods with modern technology. The implants they used could deliver drugs or electrical stimulation remotely. The search for Kozlov intensified. His escape tunnel led to a hidden garage where vehicles were waiting. By the time authorities reached it, he was long gone, but he'd left something behind. A laptop that Oscar was able to partially recover. He's got safe houses in 7 countries, Oscar reported, and bank accounts with millions in funding. This isn't over. He can set up again somewhere else. The international implications required State Department involvement. Suddenly, what started as 3 missing FBI agents had become a diplomatic crisis involving dozens of countries. Some nations demanded their citizens be returned immediately. Others denied any knowledge of purchasing programmed operatives, despite evidence to the contrary. The Mexican government faced criticism for allowing such an operation on their soil, while the American government was questioned about how they'd missed such a massive threat. David Reeves' deprogramming was more difficult than Cole's. The conditioning had taken deeper root, and he struggled with distinguishing between his real memories and implanted ones. "I remember volunteering for the mission," he said during one session with Dr. Mitchell, "but I also remember being grabbed in the tunnel." Both feel equally real. Michael Torres faced the worst challenges. The unconscious state he'd been found in was his mind's way of protecting itself from the conflicting programming. When he finally woke, he couldn't remember who he was, recognizing neither his fellow agents nor his own family. The programming created such cognitive dissonance that his mind essentially shut down and rebooted, Dr. Mitchell explained. We're having to rebuild his identity from scratch. The facility itself took weeks to fully explore and document. Beyond the main chambers they'd seen, investigators found laboratories where drugs were developed, surgical suites where implants were installed, and most disturbingly, chambers where victims who'd resisted programming were disposed of. We've found remains of at least 30 individuals, the forensic team reported, some dating back 3 years. Kozlov had been operating longer than anyone realized. Identifying the remains became a priority. Families who'd been searching for missing loved ones finally got closure, though the truth of what happened was almost too horrible to process. Maria Gonzalez, the woman whose initial testimony had helped locate the facility, was found among the survivors. She'd been recaptured after her escape and was scheduled for intensive reprogramming when the raid occurred. They were going to erase me completely, she said. Make me into someone else entirely. I heard them discussing it. They could create whole new identities, complete with false memories. This revelation added another layer to the investigation. How many people walking around freely had been programmed and released? How many sleeper agents had Kozlov created? Leonard developed detection equipment that could identify the specific implants Kozlov used. We can't find everyone, but we can at least scan high-risk individuals, government employees, military personnel, critical infrastructure workers. The scanning program was controversial, raising civil liberties concerns. But when 17 programmed individuals were discovered in sensitive positions across 3 countries, the necessity became clear. One was a nuclear plant technician in France. Another was a military contractor with security clearance in the United States. Each had been programmed with specific triggers that could activate sabotage protocols. Removing the implants was delicate work. They were designed to release toxins if tampered with, potentially killing the host. Surgical teams had to develop new techniques, and even then, not all procedures were successful. We lost 3 patients during removal surgery, the medical team reported. The implants were too integrated with neural tissue. Attempting removal caused fatal hemorrhaging. For those who couldn't have implants safely removed, constant monitoring became necessary. They were victims who would never fully be free, always carrying the potential for activation. The investigation revealed that Kozlov had partners. The facility was too sophisticated for one person to develop alone. Intelligence agencies worldwide began hunting for his associates, leading to arrests in Russia, China, North Korea, and surprisingly Britain. Dr. James Worthington, a British neuroscientist who disappeared from Cambridge University 2 years prior, was found living under an alias in Bangkok. His research into neural manipulation had been crucial to Kozlov's programming techniques. I thought we were developing therapeutic treatments for PTSD, Worthington claimed during interrogation. By the time I realized the true purpose, it was too late. Kozlov wouldn't let me leave. Whether Worthington was a willing participant or another victim remained debatable. But his cooperation provided crucial information about the programming techniques, helping develop better deprogramming protocols. 6 months after the raid, Jennifer Cole returned to limited duty. She couldn't work undercover anymore. The psychological trauma made her too vulnerable, but she became an expert in identifying and helping programming victims. I know what they went through, she said. That shared experience helps build trust, makes recovery possible. David Reeves struggled more. Despite months of therapy, he still experienced episodes where programmed behaviors would surface. He took medical retirement, focusing on his recovery and helping other victims. Michael Torres showed remarkable resilience. Though his memories never fully returned, he built a new identity, choosing to see his experience as a rebirth rather than a loss. He became an advocate for victims of human trafficking and mind control. "They tried to erase me," he said in a speech to Congress. "But I'm still here." Different. Damaged, maybe, but still human, still fighting. 1 year after the raid on Kozlov's facility, Clifford Nash was reviewing case files in his San Antonio office when an encrypted message arrived through secure channels. It was from Mexican intelligence, and its contents made his blood run cold. "We've found another facility, bigger than Kozlov's. And Nash, they have your people." The message included surveillance photos of a compound in the Chihuahuan Desert, 200 miles from any major city. Thermal imaging showed underground structures extending far beyond the surface buildings. Most disturbing were photos of people being transported in covered trucks, people who matched the descriptions of recent missing persons from both sides of the border. Clifford immediately contacted Gilbert Morrison and reassembled their team. The lessons learned from Kozlov's operation had led to the creation of a joint task force specifically for border-related disappearances, but this new discovery suggested they'd only scratched the surface of a larger conspiracy. Oscar Hoffman, now a senior analyst, had been tracking financial patterns similar to those that had funded Kozlov. 6 months ago, large purchases of medical equipment, construction materials, and electronic components, all through shell companies that eventually trace back to a consortium registered in Cyprus. "Kozlov's funding?" Gilbert asked. "No, different source, but the purchasing patterns are identical. Someone studied Kozlov's operation and is replicating it on a larger scale." Attorney General Mendez arrived from Mexico City with disturbing intelligence. "We've had an asset inside for 2 months. According to their reports, this facility holds over 200 people. But it's not just programming. They're conducting medical experiments." The asset, codenamed Serpiente, had managed to transmit fragmentary reports. The facility was run by Dr. Yuri Volkov, a Russian neuroscientist who'd been expelled from Moscow State University for unauthorized human experiments. He'd apparently acquired Kozlov's research and was expanding on it. "Volkov's not just programming people," Mendez explained. "He's trying to enhance them. Surgical modifications, genetic therapy, experimental drugs. He's creating what he calls upgraded humans." Albert Reeds, studying the facility's layout, identified a critical problem. This compound is built like a fortress. 30-foot walls, guard towers, military-grade security systems. Kozlov's place was hidden. This is defended. The political situation was even more complex. The facility sat in disputed territory, claimed by both a cartel and a local militia group. Any operation would require navigating not just Mexican federal authorities, but also these violent non-state actors. Ernest Valdez had been developing contacts among the local population. The people living near the compound are terrified. They call it La Fábrica de Monstruos, the monster factory. They say screams echo from it at night, and anyone who gets too close disappears. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Cole, still recovering from her ordeal but working as an analyst, recognized patterns in the missing persons reports. "Look at the victims," she said, spreading files across the conference table. "They're not random. Each has specific genetic markers, rare blood types, unusual immunities, genetic anomalies. Volkov's selecting for particular traits." Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who'd become the task force's medical advisor, confirmed the hypothesis. If he's attempting genetic enhancement, he'd need subjects with specific biological characteristics. This isn't random kidnapping, it's targeted harvesting. The implications were horrifying. Volkov was using the border region as a hunting ground for human test subjects, selecting victims based on their genetic profiles obtained through medical records ancestry databases, and blood donation centers. Leonard Pike had been monitoring electromagnetic signatures from the facility. They're running massive amounts of power underground. Whatever they're doing requires enormous energy, more than just computers and medical equipment. The decision to infiltrate came with significant risks. Unlike Kozlov's hidden operation, Volkov's facility was known to local authorities who were being paid to ignore it. Any approach would be detected. We need someone inside, Clifford decided. Someone who fits Volkov's selection criteria. Oscar had been analyzing the victim profiles. Based on the patterns, they're currently looking for subjects with type O negative blood and specific genetic markers associated with rapid healing. We could create a bait profile. Agent Patricia Wells volunteered. She was new to the task force but had the required blood type and had undergone genetic testing that showed the markers Volkov sought. The plan was dangerous. She would allow herself to be kidnapped, carrying hidden tracking devices and micro-cameras. The preparation took weeks. Patricia underwent intensive training in resistance techniques, building on what they'd learned from the Kozlov survivors. Dr. Mitchell worked with her on psychological preparation for potential programming attempts. The key is maintaining a core sense of self, Mitchell explained. Create mental anchors, memories, values, beliefs that you return to when reality becomes unclear. Patricia was inserted into Ciudad Juarez, following patterns that matched previous victims. She frequented specific clinics, donated blood, made herself visible in databases Volkov's people monitored. It took 2 weeks, but finally she was taken. The abduction was professional. A van pulling alongside her as she jogged, quick injection, unconscious in seconds. Her tracking devices showed her being transported to the compound. Clifford and the team monitored from a mobile command center hidden in the desert. Patricia's vital signs remained stable, and her microcameras transmitted fragmentary images of the facility's interior. What they saw exceeded their worst expectations. Rows of surgical suites, laboratories with equipment that belonged in major hospitals, and most disturbingly, holding cells containing people in various stages of transformation. Some victims showed surgical modifications, extra digits, modified bone structures, implanted devices visible beneath skin. Others exhibited signs of genetic manipulation, unusual eye colors, altered hair growth patterns, skin that seemed to have different properties. Patricia's camera captured Dr. Volkov himself, a thin man in his 60s, moving with the confidence of someone who believed himself untouchable. Through hidden microphones, they heard him lecturing his staff. "Evolution is too slow," Volkov said. "Humanity faces challenges that require immediate adaptation. Climate change, pandemics, potential wars. We need humans who can survive anything. I'm creating them." Patricia was processed like the other victims. Medical exams, genetic sampling, psychological evaluation. But Volkov seemed particularly interested in her profile. "Perfect specimen," he told an assistant. "The healing markers are exactly what we need for the regeneration project." She was placed in a holding cell with other recent arrivals. Using techniques the task force had developed, she made contact with them while avoiding surveillance. One was Marcus Thompson, a former Army medic who'd been missing for 3 months. "They've done things to me," he whispered. "Injections that burn, surgeries I can't remember. I heal from injuries in hours now, but the pain never stops." Another was Lisa Martinez, a geneticist who'd been kidnapped from a conference in El Paso. "He's forcing us to help with research. Those who refuse get turned into test subjects. Those who cooperate still get experimented on, just less severely." Through Patricia's intelligence, they learned the facility's true scope. Over 200 current subjects, a staff of 50, including kidnapped medical professionals, and evidence that successful experiments were being sold to unknown buyers. "He's selling enhanced humans," Patricia reported during a brief moment alone. "Soldiers who heal rapidly, workers who don't need sleep, people modified for specific tasks. It's slavery with a biotechnology twist." The evidence was enough. A joint U.S.-Mexican operation was authorized, but the assault would be complex. They needed to prevent Volkov from destroying evidence or killing subjects, while also dealing with the cartel forces protecting the compound. The solution came from Mendez's contacts in Mexican special forces. The cartel protecting Volkov is at war with another group. If we time our assault during their conflict, we might face less resistance. Ernest's local contacts confirmed that tensions were high between the protecting cartel and their rivals. A few strategic pieces of intelligence, suggesting one side was planning to betray the other, sparked the conflict they needed. As cartel forces fought each other in the desert around the compound, joint task force units moved in. The assault was three-pronged: air support from Mexican military helicopters, ground forces breaching the walls, and a specialized team entering through utility tunnels Patricia had identified. Volkov had prepared for an assault. As alarms blared, automated systems began destroying computer servers and research documents. But Patricia, following contingency plans, had already secured crucial evidence in a hidden partition she'd created in the facility's backup systems. The medical staff, many of them victims themselves, immediately surrendered. They'd been waiting for rescue, hoping for liberation from their forced participation in Volkov's experiments. Volkov himself tried to escape through a prepared route, but Albert's team was waiting. The doctor was arrested, carrying a briefcase containing drives with all his research. He couldn't bear to destroy his life's work. The liberation of the test subjects was heartbreaking. Some were so modified they barely looked human anymore. Others were psychologically destroyed, unable to distinguish reality from the hallucinations caused by experimental drugs. Dr. Mitchell coordinated the medical response. "We need specialized facilities for these victims. Some modifications might be irreversible. Others might die if we try to reverse them." Marcus Thompson, the Army medic, had developed rapid healing, but at a terrible cost. His nervous system was hypersensitive, causing constant pain. Removing the modifications might kill him, but leaving them meant perpetual agony. Lisa Martinez had been forced to modify herself to survive, giving herself enhanced intelligence through neural implants. "I can process information faster, but I can't turn it off. Every stimulus is overwhelming. I haven't slept in weeks." The facility yielded evidence of Volkov's network. He'd been selling to military contractors, criminal organizations, even terrorist groups. The enhanced humans were being marketed as super soldiers, perfect assassins, or specialized workers for hazardous environments. One buyer list entry was particularly disturbing. A notation about Subject 0, apparently Kozlov himself. Volkov had been in communication with the missing Russian, sharing research and possibly planning joint operations. "Kozlov's still out there," Clifford told the task force, "and now he has Volkov's research to add to his own." The international implications were staggering. Enhanced humans had already been deployed in various conflicts, their modifications making them nearly unstoppable by conventional means. Several governments quietly admitted to purchasing Volkov's products, though all claimed it was for research purposes only. Patricia Wells received commendations for her bravery, but the experience had changed her. "I was lucky. They didn't have time to modify me. But seeing what they did to others, knowing I was days away from becoming an experiment, It changes your perspective on human nature. The victims faced difficult choices. Some modifications could be partially reversed through surgery and gene therapy, but the process was risky and expensive. Others chose to keep their enhancements, trying to find ways to live with abilities they never asked for. Marcus Thompson became an advocate for enhancement victims, establishing a support network. We're not monsters or super soldiers. We're people who were tortured and modified against our will. We deserve compassion, not fear. The facility was destroyed after all evidence was collected. The ground was contaminated with experimental chemicals and biological agents, requiring extensive cleanup. The site was eventually sealed, with warnings in multiple languages about the hazards beneath. Volkov was prosecuted in Mexico, facing charges of kidnapping, human trafficking, torture, and crimes against humanity. His trial became a landmark case for bioethics and human rights. During his testimony, Volkov showed no remorse. I was advancing human evolution. In 100 years, when humanity faces extinction-level threats, they'll wish they had embraced my vision. He was sentenced to life in prison, his research classified and secured. But the knowledge was out there. Other scientists had seen what was possible, and some were undoubtedly planning their own experiments. The task force expanded its mission, now monitoring for signs of human enhancement experiments worldwide. They developed protocols for identifying and rescuing victims, though the technology kept advancing faster than regulations could follow. Leonard developed detection equipment for various enhancement signatures: genetic modifications, surgical implants, chemical alterations. We're entering an era where the definition of human is being challenged. We need to be prepared. 6 months after Volkov's arrest, intelligence suggested at least 3 new enhancement facilities were operating, one in Eastern Europe, one in Southeast Asia, and one possibly in Africa. The technology Volkov and Kozlov had pioneered was spreading. "It's like Pandora's box, Doctor," Mitchell observed. "Once the knowledge exists, you can't unknow it. The best we can do is try to regulate it, protect victims, and prevent the worst abuses." The border region remained a concern. The chaos and corruption that had allowed Kozlov and Volkov to operate hadn't disappeared. If anything, their success had inspired others to attempt similar operations. Clifford, now promoted to coordinate the international response to human trafficking and enhancement, reflected on how the case had evolved. "We started looking for 3 missing agents. We uncovered a conspiracy to reprogram humans. Then we discovered attempts to rebuild humanity itself. What's next?" The answer came sooner than expected. Reports of enhanced individuals committing crimes, their modifications making them nearly impossible for regular law enforcement to stop. The enhanced humans Volkov had sold were being used as weapons, and stopping them required new tactics and technologies. Jennifer Cole, David Reeves, and Michael Torres, the 3 agents whose disappearance had started everything, became consultants for dealing with enhanced individuals. Their experience being programmed gave them unique insights into the psychology of modification victims. "We know what it's like to have your humanity stripped away," Cole explained. "That empathy is crucial when dealing with enhanced individuals who may not even remember who they were before modification." 2 years had passed since the Volkov facility raid when Clifford Nash received intelligence that would reveal the true mastermind behind both operations. The information came from an unlikely source: Colonel Viktor Kozlov himself, captured after a failed attempt to establish a new facility in Guatemala. Kozlov sat in a federal interrogation room in Houston, looking older and defeated. 2 years on the run had taken their toll, but his eyes still held the calculating intelligence that had made him so dangerous. "Agent Nash," Kozlov said in accented English, I assume you want to know about the others. Others? Volkov was my student, but we were both pawns. There's someone else, someone who's been orchestrating everything from the beginning. They call themselves the Directorate. According to Kozlov, the Directorate was a shadow organization of wealthy individuals and corporations who saw human enhancement as the next stage of economic development. They'd funded multiple facilities, treating Kozlov and Volkov as competing researchers in a twisted experiment. They wanted to see which methods worked best, Kozlov explained. My programming techniques or Volkov's physical enhancements. The survivors from both facilities. They're being studied, their data used to perfect the process. Gilbert Morrison had been tracking financial anomalies related to enhancement research. If Kozlov's telling the truth, we're looking at a conspiracy involving major pharmaceutical companies, defense contractors, even tech giants. The investigation revealed the Directorate's structure. 7 members, each representing different industries. They met quarterly in international waters aboard a yacht registered to a Panamanian shell company. Their next meeting was in 3 weeks. Oscar Hoffman coordinated with international intelligence agencies. The yacht, Prometheus, will be in the Gulf of Mexico. International waters, but close enough for us to monitor. The operation to infiltrate the Directorate's meeting required careful planning. They couldn't simply raid the yacht in international waters, but they could gather evidence for future prosecution. Albert Reeds led the surveillance team. Using advanced equipment, they monitored the yacht from a disguised fishing vessel. What they heard confirmed Kozlov's claims and revealed something worse. Phase 3 is ready for implementation, a voice said over the intercepted communications. The border facilities were proof of concept. Now we scale globally. The Directorate was planning to open enhancement facilities in 12 countries, targeting regions with weak governance and desperate populations. They'd learned from Kozlov and Volkov's mistakes, planning operations that would be legally ambiguous and harder to shut down. Leonard Pike decoded their encrypted files. They're not kidnapping anymore. They're recruiting volunteers from refugee camps, poverty-stricken areas, people desperate enough to submit to enhancement for money. This presented a legal and ethical dilemma. If people volunteered for enhancement, even under economic duress, was it still a crime? The task force faced questions that existing laws couldn't answer. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been studying the long-term effects on enhancement survivors. Whether voluntary or forced, the modifications cause severe psychological trauma. The human psyche isn't designed to handle rapid physical or mental changes. Jennifer Cole, who'd been working with survivors, confirmed this. Even those who initially volunteered regretted. They've lost their humanity in ways they didn't expect. They're neither fully human nor the enhanced beings they were promised to become. The breakthrough in the case came from Maria Gonzalez, the woman whose initial escape had helped expose Kozlov's facility. She'd been working with the task force as a counselor for survivors when she recognized a pattern. The recruitment messages all use the same psychological triggers, she explained. Hope for the desperate, power for the weak, belonging for the isolated. It's cult recruitment tactics applied to human enhancement. This insight led to a new approach. Instead of trying to shut down facilities after they were operational, they would disrupt recruitment, expose the Directorate's manipulation, and provide alternatives for vulnerable populations. Ernest Valdez coordinated with NGOS in targeted regions. We're setting up education programs, warning people about enhancement recruitment, but we're also addressing the desperation that makes them vulnerable. Job training, medical aid, microcredit programs. The strategy showed results. recruitment for the Directorate's new facilities slowed as potential victims became aware of the true costs of enhancement. Meanwhile, Patricia Wells had been investigating the Directorate members' legitimate businesses. They're all heavily invested in biotechnology and artificial intelligence. Enhancement research is hidden within legitimate corporate R&D. One company, Prometheus Biotechnology, named after their yacht, was developing therapeutic genetic modifications that were actually enhancement technologies refined from Kozlov and Volkov's research. The FBI coordinated with the SEC to investigate financial irregularities. While they couldn't prosecute the Directorate for Enhancement Research directly, they could target financial crimes, tax evasion, and securities fraud. The investigation revealed that the Directorate had been manipulating stock prices, using knowledge of enhancement breakthroughs to make billions in biotechnology investments. This gave law enforcement the leverage they needed. Arrests began simultaneously in 7 countries. Directorate members were charged with various financial crimes, though the enhancement conspiracy remained classified. The public story was corporate corruption. The truth was far darker. During the raids, investigators discovered the Directorate's ultimate plan, Project Chrysalis. They intended to create a 2-tier human species, enhanced elites who could afford modifications, and unmodified masses who would become obsolete. It's social Darwinism meets late-stage capitalism, Oscar explained to the task force. They weren't just selling enhancements. They were trying to restructure human society. The evidence included contracts with governments interested in enhanced soldiers, corporations wanting modified workers, and even parents seeking advantages for their children. The market for human enhancement was larger than anyone had imagined. Dr. Mitchell testified before a closed congressional hearing. We're at a crossroads. Enhancement technology exists and can't be uninvented. We need regulations, ethical guidelines, and most importantly, equality of access. Otherwise, we risk creating a genetically stratified society. The survivors of Kozlov and Volkov's facilities became powerful advocates against unregulated enhancement. Marcus Thompson, still living with his painful rapid healing, spoke at the United Nations. They promised to make us better than human, he said. Instead, they took away what made us human. No enhancement is worth losing your soul. Lisa Martinez, the geneticist who'd been forced to enhance her own intelligence, worked on developing reversal treatments. Some modifications can be undone, but it takes time and carries risks. The best protection is prevention. Michael Torres, the FBI agent who'd lost his memories to Kozlov's programming, had rebuilt his life and now trained law enforcement in dealing with enhancement-related crimes. The technology will keep advancing. We need to advance our response equally fast. The border region, where it all began, remained a concern. The tunnels that had hidden Kozlov's facility were destroyed, but new ones were constantly being dug. Each one was now carefully monitored for signs of enhancement operations. Clifford established a permanent task force based in El Paso, coordinating with Mexican authorities to prevent future facilities. The border's vulnerability made it attractive for these operations. We're turning that vulnerability into vigilance. The international response varied. Some countries banned enhancement research entirely. Others regulated it heavily. A few embraced it, becoming havens for enhancement tourism. China announced a state-sponsored enhancement program, claiming it was for medical purposes but clearly aimed at creating advantages in various fields. This triggered an enhancement arms race that the task force had tried to prevent. "We've opened Pandora's box," Gilbert observed. "The question now is how to manage what's been released." 5 years after the first disappearances at Eagle Pass, Clifford stood at the memorial erected for enhancement victims. It listed not just names, but what had been taken from them: their autonomy, their humanity, their lives. Jennifer Cole stood beside him. She'd never fully recovered from her programming experience, but she'd found purpose in helping others. We saved hundreds, maybe thousands, from enhancement facilities, but how many more are out there that we don't know about? The question haunted everyone involved in the investigation. Technology had made it easier to modify humans, but harder to detect modifications. Black market enhancement shops operated in major cities, offering quick modifications for those who could pay. David Reeves, who'd struggled with programming effects for years, had finally found stability through experimental therapy. He now worked with Dr. Mitchell on developing treatment protocols. Every survivor is different. What helps one might harm another. We're learning as we go. The legal framework slowly evolved. The UN passed the Convention on Human Enhancement, establishing we need specialized training and equipment. The revelation of the Directorate's existence triggered investigations into other shadow organizations. Several were discovered, each with different approaches to human enhancement but similar goals, creating a superior class of humans. Leonard's detection technology became standard equipment for border security, airports, and government facilities. We can identify most common enhancements now, but the technology keeps evolving, and we're always playing catch-up. Ernest worked with communities along the border, educating them about enhancement recruitment tactics. Knowledge is protection. If people understand the risks and recognize the recruitment patterns, they're less likely to become victims. The ethical debates continued. Some argued that enhancement was human evolution and should be embraced. Others saw it as a fundamental threat to human nature. The survivors' voices were often lost in these philosophical arguments. "We're not thought experiments," Patricia Wells said at a bioethics conference. "We're people who were tortured, modified, and traumatized. Any discussion of enhancement that doesn't center on consent and human dignity is missing the point." Kozlov died in prison, taking many secrets with him. His final statement was chilling: "You've delayed the inevitable." Humans will enhance themselves or be replaced by those who do. The only question is whether it happens through choice or force. Volkov was killed by another inmate, reportedly hired by someone wanting to silence him. His research, despite being classified, had somehow leaked onto the dark web, inspiring new generations of enhancement researchers. The Directorate members received varying sentences. Some cooperated, providing intelligence about other enhancement operations. Others maintained their innocence, claiming they were advancing human potential. The Prometheus yacht was seized and converted into a floating medical facility for treating enhancement victims. It seemed fitting, a symbol of exploitation transformed into a tool for healing. 10 years after the initial disappearances, Clifford retired from the FBI. At his farewell ceremony, he reflected on the journey. "We started investigating missing agents. We ended up confronting questions about what it means to be human. The case is closed, but the questions remain." His successor, Jennifer Cole, had transformed her trauma into expertise. The enhancement age is here whether we like it or not. Our job is to ensure it doesn't come at the cost of human dignity and freedom. The border facilities were gone, but the border itself remained a symbol of division, not just between nations, but between human and enhanced, between what we are and what some believe we should become. The last entry in Clifford's case file was philosophical. We saved bodies and minds from unwanted modification. But the idea of enhancement, the dream of transcending human limitations that can't be destroyed. It's part of human nature, the desire to be more than we are, The tragedy is when that desire is exploited by those who see humans as raw material for their ambitions. The task force continued its work, adapting to new threats, new technologies, new ethical challenges. Enhancement facilities were discovered and shut down regularly, but the demand for modification never ceased. In the end, the border disappearances case wasn't really about the border at all. It was about boundaries between human and machine, between choice and coercion, between evolution and exploitation. Those boundaries, Clifford knew, would be contested for generations to come. The three agents whose disappearance had started everything, Cole, Reeves, and Torres, became symbols of survival and resistance. Their ordeal had exposed a conspiracy that threatened the very definition of humanity. As Clifford drove away from FBI headquarters for the last time, he passed a billboard advertising safe legal enhancement services. The future had arrived, regulated but not prevented. The question was whether humanity could enhance itself without losing itself. The investigation was over, but the implications would ripple through history. The border disappearances had revealed not just a crime, but a crossroads. A moment when humanity had to decide what it wanted to become and what prices it was willing to pay. The answer, Clifford suspected, would be written by survivors like Cole, Reeves, and Torres, those who'd experienced enhancement's dark side and could guide others away from its worst extremes. They were the guardians now, protecting not just borders, but the essence of what made humans human. The case files were sealed, the facilities destroyed, the conspirators imprisoned or dead. But somewhere, in hidden laboratories and corporate boardrooms, the dream of enhancement lived on. And somewhere else, survivors and agents stood ready to ensure that dream didn't become humanity's nightmare.